Live na po.
Sige. Hi YouTubers! Welcome to Basic Transfer Pricing, and this is our first na live, no? I would like to say thank you sa ating mga YouTubers. We already have 56 subscribers, no? Please subscribe to our channel, and we promise to bring you more na mga updates po sa transfer pricing, local and international. But today, ang i-discuss ko po sa inyo is Revenue Regulations 2-2013. This is the transfer pricing guidelines po na ginawa po dito sa Pilipinas, and ito po ay base sa OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. Okay? So, shout out muna tayo. Sino yung mga nandyan?
Wala pong nagka-comment eh. Pero may viewer tayo na apat.
Okay, yung viewer po natin na apat, write po sa comment portion yung inyong pangalan para ma-recognize po natin, and we promise to give you more fun dito po sa sa basic transfer pricing natin, no? Mga surprises po kami sa inyo. So please acknowledge, no? Acknowledge namin kayo dito. So shout out po sa mga nandyan na at nanonood po sa atin ngayon. No? Okay, so let's start with the Revenue Regulations 2-2013. This is the Transfer Pricing Guidelines dated January 23 of 2013. Okay. Bakit po ba ginawa itong basic transfer pricing guidelines na to? What is this for? No? So the background, no, let's just discuss kung ano itong background ng basic transfer pricing. No? So, ang dahilan po kung bakit inadapt yung transfer pricing, actually, dito sa Pilipinas, inadapt natin to bago lang, no? But in some other countries of the world, matagal na. Just like US, 1920s, may transfer pricing na po sila. No? At ang tawag noon, cherry picking. No? Hindi pa siya transfer pricing. It just evolved. Nung mga 1960s na tinatawag sa kanila is transfer pricing. And mind you, the IRS already collected so much collection from the use of this audit tool, which is the transfer pricing. And transfer pricing, for your information, is economic taxation. So, the dramatic increase in globalization of trade has led to harmful tax practices. Kailan ba nag-umpisa yung globalization, mga 1960s, no? Na open na yung business, na one world na tayo, at anybody can do business, no? Kung saan niya gusto. So inopen na yung globalization, meaning meron na tayong free trade, may mga measures na ginawa na because of the improvement ng technology at saka ng communication, so it is possible na to do business all over the world. No? But yung globalization na yan, ang dala naman yan is harmful tax practices. Why? Because yung mga business owners, pwede nilang i-shift yung kanilang pricing of goods and services to the country na mas mababa yung tax rate in order to minimize or to lessen the payment of taxes. So yun naman po yung resulta. Why? Because as the goods and services cross the border, meaning hindi lang siya na-consume, hindi lang siya nangyari sa isang bansa, but pumunta na siya sa ibang bansa because of the globalization, then mahihirapan na rin yung mga tax authorities to keep track kung nasaan na yung goods, saan pinarform yung services, para doon naman siya itatax. Ilan na?
Dalawa. Wala kang nagko-comment po.
Wala. Okay. Sige. Naintindihan kaya nila yan. No? Okay. So, more or less. And then, ano pang nangyari dito sa mga losses na to? Sa mga nangyayari na to, nagkaroon ng losses ang tax revenues for the governments. No? Nagkaroon ng mga lugi sa gobyerno dahil hindi na nga po nila kolekta yung tamang taxes. No? So, the most significant international tax issue emerging from globalization confronting tax administrations worldwide is transfer pricing. So, yung pinaka issue na pinaka-importante po sa lahat yung issue po ng transfer pricing. Paano kaya ginagawa itong transfer pricing na to, no? Kaya ako nakatayo na lang dito para makita nyo at saka gusto kong karoon ng mga illustrations, no, along the way. No? So, nakikita ba ako, Hari? Okay. May nanonood pa. Sige. Ito po yung tinatawag natin na transfer pricing. Sabihin mo nga i-live kaya niya to sa Facebook. O ikaw pala dyan. Di ba? Pwede mo siyang i-live sa Facebook, di ba? Para simultaneous. Okay. Sige. So, ito po yung tinatawag natin na transfer pricing, no? Para maintindihan. Nakikita ba?
Kita po.
Okay. Ito si A, tapos si B, at saka si C, no? So, ito sila ay isang related parties. Isa lang yung may-ari o kaya isa lang yung investor. So, si A is the manufacturer, no? Siya yung tagagawa ng produkto. Tapos, pinasa niya kay B na distributor, no? Distributor. Tapos, napunta siya kay C na retailer, no? Okay. So, how does transfer pricing work? Paano ina-apply ang transfer pricing po dito? No? So, dito kay A, halimbawa ang product niya is shoes, no? Shoes, halimbawa, shoes. Okay. Dito sa kay manufacturer, ang cost ng production niya para magawa niya yung isang sapatos is 300, no? Ngayon, binentan niya kay distributor, pinasa naman niya doon ng 500, no? Si B naman, pinasa naman niya doon kay C ng 1,000, no? Okay. So, yan po yung sinasabi na transfer pricing. Bakit transfer pricing? Kasi, itong isang sapatos na ginawa ni manufacturer, pinasa niya dito kay B, pinasa niya dito kay C, the same lang na sapatos, pero iba-iba yung presyo, no? So, dyan po talo na since isa lang yung may-ari, pwede niyang kontrolin yung presyo kung papaano niya ipasa doon sa susunod na transaction, no? Tawag dito commercial and financial transactions. Okay? May nanonood pa? Sige. Anyway, kasi first time naman natin nag-live, no? And then, so ito, ang tawag dito, related parties. Bakit siya related party? Kasi siya lang yung may-ari sa lahat. So yung company A, same person yung may-ari. Sa company B, same person din. At sa company C, same person pa rin. No? So yun po yung sinasabi dito sa bakit inadapt yung transfer pricing na to, nagagawin siyang audit tool at saka technique ng gobyerno para pag-aralan kung papaano charge ng isang company yung other company na siya din yung may-ari para matukompute na mabuti yung taxes, no? So, ito po yung aming classroom. I-tour mo muna siya. Tour muna natin sila. No? Kikita ba yan? Oh, sige. Iikot mo na lang. So, hindi tayo makatour doon sa library, no? No? Kasi hindi siya mako-connect dyan. So, dito po kami sa mga nanonood sa atin sa mga YouTube channel natin doon sa tax training, no? Ito po yung aming Dito kami palagi nag-live, nagre-record, no? Okay. Alvin! Tawagin natin si Alvin. Halika. Halika, mag-ano ka muna. Magpakita ka. Sige. Halika, Ari. Magpakita kayo. Bakit doon na? Tingnan mo pati doon para makita nila yung mga equipments. Yun. Yan po. Ikot. Yan. Dito po kami na bibidyo palagi doon sa aming mga tax training, no? So, halika na, Hari. Dito ka, Sige. Sige, magsalita din kayo. Introduce yourself.
Good afternoon po.
Kasi magsasalita.
Ako po si Hari. Kami po in charge sa pagla-live po sa mga equipments para sa live ni Ma'am Elsa Cañete.
So, anong position mo?
Ako po ay IT officer.
Okay. Sige.
Good afternoon po. Ako po si Alvin.
Kita kayo?
Katulad po ni Harry, kami po in charge behind the camera sa mga live, sa mga videos ni Madam. Kami po yung mga nag-edit. Kung may mga suggestion pa po kayo or may mga napansin po kayo sa videos namin, comment nyo lang po para ma-improve pa po namin yung mga videos din.
Tama ka dyan.
Pero habang nagko-comment po kayo, subscribe na rin po, share nyo na rin para marami pong para ma-share nyo rin sa iba, lalo may mga accountant, mga estudyante, nag-aaral na accounting. Share nyo po sa kanila para malaman po nila malaman yung mga learnings ni Madam, lalo na sa tax. Yan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nag-live na ba tayo sa Facebook?
Hindi ko pa nga ma-set up mo.
Sige. Asan, tawagin mo si, si... Para sabay. Okay. So, yun po yung ating mga kasama dito. And since nag-a-adjust pa po kami sa new normal, dahil kung mapapansin ninyo, yun aming po talagang serbisyo dito is the face-to-face po na mga seminars, no? For how many years? I-simultaneous nyo sa Facebook. Mag-live na rin tayo sa Facebook. Kasi first time kasi natin para alam nila. No? Okay, so mag-ano ka muna dito, say hi at introduce yourself. Hindi ka na. Dito. Introduce yourself.
Hi po. Ako po pala si Charles Lucas.
DJ, siya po yung
Ako po yung nag-ano din po ng sound tsaka yung mga banner, mga ads po. Thank you po.
Welcome. Welcome sa live stream.
Welcome po sa live streaming po.
Okay. So, we are still adjusting po sa new normal kasi ang alam lang namin yung mga face-to-face na seminar ever since, no? Pero ngayon, since online na, ang problema pala dito more on technical na sometimes wala kang sounds, yung mga lights mo hindi maganda, no? So, nag-ano pa kami, nangangapa pa, but we're still improving, no? Na sana madala pa rin namin sa inyo yung mga kaalaman through this online seminar kami. Ay nagla-live streaming itong ating basic transfer pricing since ito ay napaka-specialized po na topic. So, dadalhin po namin sila sa inyo separately. Pero yung ating pong YouTube channel na tax training, tuloy-tuloy pa rin po yun. Binukod lang natin itong basic transfer pricing so that lahat ng mga topics na very specific about basic transfer pricing dito po ninyo mapapanood. No? Okay. So, kung may mga katanungan po, may mga feedback, please comment lang po dyan sa ating comment portion at sasagutin po natin yung mga feedbacks ninyo. Okay? Meron pa? Wala na nanonood?
Tatlo. Tatlo po.
Tatlo pa rin. Sige. Go. So, tuloy lang po tayo ha. Yung, naka-record ba ito?
Opo.
Oo,
Sa
na.
YouTube ma'am.
Pagkatapos ano yun, okay. Sige, so thank you po sa YouTube. Thank you for this opportunity. Kasi para sa akin, napakalaking help po ng ginagawa ng YouTube, especially these days. Ganito po yung sitwasyon. So napakalaki po talaga ng tulong ng YouTube dito po sa ating mga mamamayan. No? So thank you very much YouTube. Thank you very much for these opportunities. Okay. So going back to sinasabi natin na transfer pricing. Ito po, ang tawag dito, transfer pricing. Bakit? Kasi tinatransfer mo yung goods at binibigyan mo rin siya ng price. No? So ito yung ABC na iba't ibang company, pero isa lang yung may-ari. Tinatransfer niya yung goods and services sa kanyang mga company na iba, and then, binibigyan niya ng ibang presyo. So, ang tawag po dyan ay transfer pricing. No? So, nagkakaroon ito ng malaking issue pag halimbawa si A nasa isang bansa. No? Nandito siya sa isang bansa na to. To, country A. No? Country A. Pagdating naman dito sa kay B, no? Country B naman, ibang country na. Pagdating naman dito sa kay C, country C na, no? Okay. Kung isang bansa lang yan, walang masyadong problema kasi kahit saan siya magpunta, iisa lang yung tax na i-impose. Nagkakaroon lang siya ng problema, halimbawa, kung mapunta na siya sa iba't ibang bansa, at dito si country A, iba yung tax authority niya, iba yung pangungulekta ng buwis. Pagdating kay country B, iba namang kolekta ng buwis. Pagdating kay country C, iba naman yung kolekta ng buwis. Kaya, dito nagkakaroon ng problema. Especially kung yung management ng country A, ko-control niya yung mga presyo dito para makatipid sila ng tax. No? So, yan po yung ibig sabihin ng transfer pricing. Wala pang question? Okay. So, transfer pricing defined as the pricing of cross-border intra-firm transactions between related parties or associated enterprises. So, yan na po yung pinakita kong illustration sa inyo. No? Transfer pricing is economic taxation. Why economic taxation? Kasi po, ang economic activities ng isang kumpanya, yan ang pinag-aaralan para malagyan siya ng tamang treatment pagdating po sa tax. No? So, transfer price occurs between taxpayer of a country with high income taxes and a related or associated enterprise of a country with low income taxes. So, in the Philippines, intra-firm, interrelated transactions account for a substantial portion of the transfer of goods and services. However, the revenue collection from related party groups continue to go on a downtrend. So, hindi po nalalayo yung Pilipinas sa ibang bansa. Dito sa Pilipinas, mayroon ding ganyang klase ng group of companies na ko-control nila yung pricing nila ng goods and services at na babawasan po yung pagbabayad ng tax, no? So, halimbawa, dito sa country na to, dito sa example natin. So, dito sa country A, halimbawa, yung income tax dito is 36%, no? Yun ang tax. Pagdating naman dito sa kay country B, ang tax dito is 30%, no? Pagdating naman dito kay country C, ang tax naman dito is 15%, no? Okay. So anong gagawin ng management, no? So kung dito nila i-report yung malaking income sa country A, ang laki ng babayaran nila 36%. Kung dito sa country B nila i-report yung malaking income, 30% malaki pa rin. So saan nila i-report yung maliit na malaking income dito sa country C. Bakit? Kasi maliit lang yung babayaran na tax, 15%, no? So, anong gagawin nila ngayon? Bawasan nila yung presyo dito sa dalawang bansa, dito nila ilalagay yung malaking presyo sa country C para doon ma-recognize yung malaking income at diyan babayaran yung malaking tax, pero maliit pa rin dahil maliit ang tax rate, no? So ganyan po nagkakaroon ng scheme o nagkakaroon ng pamamaraan yung management ng isang kumpanya para po makatipid sila ng pambabayad ng taxes. Okay na?
Kung marami nanonood sa Facebook, nasa 30. Facebook sila kami ba sa YouTube?
Kasi hindi nila ano yung YouTube, no? No, yung mga nanonood po sa Facebook, okay, meron din po tayo, naka-live din po tayo sa YouTube channel po natin, no? Ito yung YouTube natin na Basic Transfer Pricing Philippines, no? So, hi po sa ating mga ka-Facebook. Makukuha nyo ba, shout out natin yung sa Facebook? Kukuha nyo yung mga pangalan? Hindi. Okay.
Si Ma'am Gina Rosales.
Oh, si Ma'am Gina Rosales, shout out po sa Cebu, no? Talagang napakasipag na ano. Ang ganda-ganda ng apo mo, Ma'am Gina, no? I'm always watching you sa Facebook, no? Saka hindi ko makalimutan si Ma'am Gina. Siya yung accountant ng Emluelier, no? Okay. Kitang-kita ko yung mga escapade mo sa Facebook, kaso lang na lockdown, kaya
21 viewers.
kaya stay at home ka na, no? Like me, hindi na lumalabas dito. Okay, sino pa?
Siya lang po yung bumati. Si Ma'am Dina.
Si Ma'am Dina. Si Ma'am Dina, sweet na sweet, parang sweet 16, no?
Ako po si, si M. Reyes.
Si CM. Bakit siya nanood? Mag-aral ka ng transfer pricing. CM.
Tapos po si Johnny Mel Garay.
Johnny Melgaray, hello, no? Shout out.
Sabi
Thank
po
you
ni
for
Ma'am
watching.
Gina Rosales, gumaganda daw po kayo.
Gumaganda. Tanda-tanda na nga po eh. Kayo ang maganda, pati yung apo nyo, no? Okay. So, wala na? Sige, tuloy lang po tayo ha. Kasi ito pong transfer pricing, napaka-importante po ito ngayon. Actually, dito sa Pilipinas, hindi pa masyado natin pinapansin. But sa ibang bansa po, nagkakagulo na sila dito dahil sa transfer pricing. No? At ang yung mga ibang bansa na may mga transfer pricing experts na talaga sila, no, na ang mga cases nila nakakarating na sa korte, decided na ng Supreme Court nila. No? So, malalaki na po yung taxes na kukolekta because of transfer pricing. Okay? So, ito talagang, ina-explain ko po sa inyo yung transfer pricing in a way na maintindihan natin, no? At saka, hindi ko siya binibilisan. Kasi yung ating live streaming is 1 o'clock onwards, no? So, hanggang magsawa kayo. Pero, inuunti-unti ko siya para hindi siya hirap kasi very technical. Pag binilisan ko, mahirapan tayo maintindihan. So, balikan ko lang doon sa mga bago pa sa nag-tune in ngayon, no? Ito yung tinatawag natin na transfer pricing. Ito yung pricing ng goods and services between the group or between the related parties. So, ang example ko, halimbawa si A is a manufacturer, no? Tapos yung related party niya, si B, ginawa niya distributor, and si C, ginawa niya retailer, no? So, pero sa totoong buhay, itong mga malalaking kumpanya na to, hindi lang yan tatlo yung companies nila. Something like 1,000, no? Alam yan ni Ma'am Gina, no? Something like 2,000, 3,000 companies yan, no? So, mga related parties. Okay. So, dito sa transfer pricing na to, halimbawa si A is a manufacturer. Tapos, ang isang company is distributor, ang isang company is retailer. No? So, halimbawa na lang yung kanilang product na ginagawa is shoes, no? So, si A, ginawa niya yung shoes at a cost of 300, no? So, anong ginawa niya? Binenta niya kay distributor na related party niya o kaya siya pa rin yung may-ari. Binenta niya, pinresyohan niya ng 500, no? And then, pagdating sa kay B naman, pinasa na naman niya sa kay C na other related party ng 1,000, no? So, wala sanang problema ang transfer pricing kung itong mga companies na to situated sa isang country na pare-pareho lang yung tax rate, no? So, nagkakaroon ito ng special treatment kapag ang CA nasa country A, ibang bansa. Si B, nasa country B, ibang bansa din. At si C, nasa country C, ibang bansa din. No? At nagkakaroon pa to ng another issue pa. Pagka sa country A, iba yung tax rate niya, 36%. Si country B, iba din yung tax rate, 30%. At si country C, iba din yung tax rate, nagiging 15%. So, anong mangyayari dito? Since ang sabi natin, napakalaking expense isang company ang tax, kasi you can just imagine 36%. So kung halimbawa ang net income mo dito is 1,360 na kaagad yung nasa gobyerno, no? So napakalaki. So dito naman sa country B, kung halimbawa may net income ka na 1,300 yan ang sa gobyerno, 700 lang yung sa iyo. Samantalang kay country C, 15% lang. So, sa 1,000, 850 yung sa yun na net income, 150 lang para sa gobyerno. So, since ito yung scenario, ito yung nangyayari, anong magiging issue dito? So, instead na si country A, malaki yung net income na i-declare niya sa country A, liliitan niya kasi napakalaki ng tax, no? Halimbawa naman si country B, liitan din niya. Saan niya lakihan yung income na i-declare niya? Dito sa country C kasi 15% lang. No? So, ganyan po mangyayari yung related party natin sa transfer pricing. Okay? May, ano pa? May
28 viewers tayo sa Facebook, ma'am.
sa YouTube.
Sa YouTube, dalawa.
Dalawa na lang. Okay, sige. Go. Okay. So, revenue lost from interrelated transactions can be attributed to the fact that related companies are more interested in their net income as a whole rather than as individual corporation. No? So, as such, there is a desire to minimize tax payments by taking advantage of the loopholes in our tax system. So, ano pong ibig sabihin dito? Itong sabi natin, this is one entity taken as a whole kasi isa lang yung may-ari, no? Kahit tatlong company yan siya, pero since isa lang yung may-ari, saan sila interested? Interested sila kung saan sila makatipid ng tax. So, yung sabi ko na sa inyo kanina, saan niya i-declare yung malaking income? Dito sa country C. So, anong gagawin niya dito sa country A at saka sa country B? Bawasan niya dyan yung income. So, paano niya bawasan? Lakihan niya yung cost, no? So, lalakihan niya yung cost para bawas yung income. San liliit yung cost dito sa country C para dyan malaki ang income, no? Okay. Wala pang question?
Wala po.
Okay. Sige. So, while transfer pricing issue typically occurs in cross-border transactions, dito po sa Pilipinas, it can also occur in domestic transactions, no? So, itong sample ko sa inyo kanina is cross-border to between countries. Pero, pwede din siya mangyari sa Pilipinas, within the Philippines lang, ang ibig sabihin dyan, domestic transactions, no? So, one context where transfer pricing issue occurs domestically is where one associated enterprise entitled to income tax exemptions is being used to allocate income away from a company subject to regular income taxes, no? So, papaano? Gumagamit po sila ng mga exempt companies, no? Kaya kung titingnan natin itong mga nangyaring mga issues ngayon sa ABS-CBN natin, yung ating transfer pricing issues dyan, no? Kasama dyan yung mga exemptions ng kanilang mga tax-exempt na companies, no? Na yung income ng ibang companies na taxable, pinapasok doon sa income exempt na organizations, no? Para transfer pricing issue pa rin yan. Bakit? Kasi instead na magbabayad yun ng tax, siyempre dahil exempt, hindi siya magbabayad, no? Okay.
May question, ma'am.
Okay, question.
May question po, ma'am, galing kay Ma'am Iris Nario.
Akala ko si Iris Ramos, yung taga Cebu natin na participant.
Iris Nario, ma'am.
Nario, shout out po, Miss Iris. Saan siya? Sa Facebook?
Sa Facebook.
Okay.
Sabi po niya, ma'am, kung iba daw po ba ang tax rate ni A, B, tsaka ni reseller?
Magkaiba. Kasi iba-ibang country po sila. No? So, based po sa example po natin, magkakaiba po yung tax rate ng income tax. And remember po, yung pinag-uusapan sa transfer pricing, income tax lang, ha? Hindi yan pinag-uusapan yung ibang klase ng tax. Kaya during the transfer pricing audit po ninyo, kung ma-audit kayo ng transfer pricing, ang pwede lang gawin ng examiner doon na adjustment is your income tax. Hindi niya pakialaman yung value added tax or business taxes. No? So, income tax lang po talaga. So, yung pinag-usapan natin, iba-iba po yung tax rates bawat country. No? Kung saan nagninegosyo yung group of company. Excuse me. Group of companies. Yan po yung sa related parties na cross-border. So, since ang pinag-usapan naman natin ngayon is the domestic, pwede rin po ba na may domestic transfer pricing? Yes, meron. Bakit? Kasi ang sabi nga natin, paano nangyari? Yung example na isa dito, kung mayroon yung domestic na company na subject siya sa regular or normal income tax rate, pero meron naman siya mga exempt organizations na doon niya chinanel yung kanyang income para ma-exempt, no? So, isa pa, the Philippines, kahit sabihin na natin na mataas yung ating income tax rate na 30%, but we have so much exemptions po na binibigay. Ano yung mga exemptions natin sa tax rates na pinakamababa? Itong mga PESA registered enterprises natin. May requirements nga lang sila, no? Sa kanilang paggawa ng negosyo dito sa atin na zero rated sila sa VAT pero simultaneous i-export nila yung kanilang products, no? So, ano tong mga exemptions natin sa PESA registered enterprises? Ito yung preferential tax rates na 5% in lieu of all taxes. No, so hindi siya nagbabayad ng 30%. Nasabi natin normal income tax rate sa Pilipinas. Doon siya sa preferential income tax rate which is 5% of the gross profit. So you can just imagine gross profit is sales less cost of sales equals gross profit multiply by the 5% preferential rate. Napakaliit na lang po ng binabayaran, no? So ganyan po sila nakakatipid ng payment ng taxes dito sa Pilipinas natin, no? So, yun yung domestic transfer pricing issues. So ano ang trend naman na ginagawa ng ating mga Center for Tax Policies and Administrations? Ang isa po sa pinag-aaralan nila is that i-lower down yung tax rate pero tanggalin lahat ang tax exemptions, no? Kasi bakit? Wala ring visa, wala ring saysay yung mataas yung tax rates mo, pero kagaya sa Pilipinas, mataas yung tax rates mo, pero marami ka namang exemption. So, nawawala pa rin yung tax, no? So, nandoon pa rin sila sa exemptions, nag-a-avail ng exemptions, no? Meron ngang isang question sa akin, itong mga YouTubers daw na talagang malaki na ang income, pwede ba daw sila mag-zero rated sa VAT? Kasi as services, itong mga services po ng YouTubers natin, subject po siya sa 12% na VAT. No? So, okay? Nakikita tayo? Okay. So, since subject yung income ng YouTubers as services, no? Tsaka wala pa tayong batas dito sa Pilipinas on digitized business, kung ano talaga yung treatment ng income of the YouTubers. So, i-classify natin siya as services, subject siya sa value-added tax na 12% pag over na siya ng 3 million. No? So, under the train law, our threshold is 3 million. So, ang tanong sa akin is, pwede daw ba siyang i-register sa PESA, as PESA Registered Enterprises, to avail of the zero-rated na rate ng VAT? Kasi naman daw, yung services na ginagawa niya, hindi naman din dito sa Pilipinas yung nagpo-process or sa abroad naman din kasi hindi naman to nag-cater lang sa mga viewers na Pilipinas but worldwide. So, ang sabi ko sa kanya, then, mapagawa ka ng company or ng corporation and then pa-register mo sa PESA, no? Kasi para ang PESA ang mag-regulate dyan, kung i-registered ka nila, then zero-rated yung sales nyo, no? So, pwede po, but it is for the Philippine Economic Zone Authority to decide, no, kung tatanggapin nila itong mga YouTubers natin na magpaparegister po doon as PESA Registered Enterprises.
May question po ulit.
Okay.
Kay Ma'am Irish Nario po ulit. Paano po kung sa Philippines ang business ni A, B at reseller at magkaiba po ang tax rate nila? Iba po lumalabas na double taxation.
Hindi po siya magiging double taxation kasi pag sinabi po kasi natin na double taxation, we are imposing the same tax to the same entity, to the same taxable period, to the same transactions. So in that case, iba-iba po kasi na magiging transactions, no? Kasi iba na yung transaction ni A, iba yung transaction ni B, iba yung transaction ni C. And for purposes of taxation, kahit na sabihin mo isa lang may-ari ng tatlong company na yan, they are taxed separately as a separate entity. Kaya hindi po siya ma-consider na double taxation. No? Pero kung tutuusin mo na magkaroon ka ng idea na double taxation to, kasi iisang product lang yan eh. Galing kay A, papunta kay B, papunta kay C. Isang product lang yan and within the country lang, no? Kasi hindi siya across border. Pero since iba-iba sila na company at sa law naman po natin, sa batas natin, sa corporation code natin, pag ibang klase ng corporation, ibang taxable entity po siya. Kaya hindi po siya pwedeng i-consider na double taxation.
May tanong po ulit siya, ma'am. Totoo daw po ba kapag online seller ka, subject to tax ka lang kapag ang capital mo ay 200,000?
Ay, sige.
Some of online business, yun ang sinasabi. So, lower than 200,000, tax exempt na po.
Wala po. Ang exemption po natin, wala po sa kapital. No? Ang tax base po natin is on sales. No? Kaya, yung iba wala nga ang kapital. Pero, halimbawa, pag may bibili sa kanila, saka lang nila bibili yun and then i-deliver. Ang taxation po natin is based on sales, hindi po based on capital. No? Yung ano lang yan, yung easy na pag nagpa-register ka ng corporation, based on capital yung charges na i-charge nila sa iyo upon registration. But for BIR purposes po, wala po sinasabi na 200,000. Ang nakapital. Ang exempt po dyan, yung income tax mo, during the year, pag nag-annualize ka na, yung 250,000, kasi 0% po yan under the train law. Doon sa graduated rate, no? 250,000 is 0%, kaya kung ang income mo is 250,000, wala po kayong babayaran na income tax. No? So, pero sa income tax lang yon. Pag hindi umabot ng 3 million yung sales mo during the year, may 3% percentage tax ka na babayaran. At pag lumagpas naman ng 3 million yung sales mo during the year, magbabayad ka ng 12% na VAT. No? Pero may deduction yun. Kasi bakit? Kasi doon sa mga purchases mo na may VAT din, i-deduct pa doon yung 12% para kung magkano man lang yung sobra, yun na lang babayaran nyo. No? Kaya wag po kayong matakot, no, mga online sellers. Wag kayong matakot na, ito ang lalaki ng babayaran ko. Mag-compute po kayo. Ano ba ang computation ng income tax? Yung income tax, gross sales, less cost of sales, less expenses. No? during the year, kung yung net income nyo na yan, sales, less cost of sale, less operating expenses, pag hindi siya umabot ng 250,000, wala po kayong tax na mabayaran. No? Sa VAT, ganun din. Basta't kumpleto kayo ng resibo at magkano yung mga pinamili nyo, i-deduct pa yan doon sa 12% din na babayaran ninyo. At ang sobra noon, doon yan na lang sa markup nyo, doon na lang po kayo magbabayad ng 12%. Kaya yung, huwag kayo matakot sa tax. No? Harapin nyo yung tax at magkaroon kayo ng proper na computation ng tax at saka proper documentation ng inyong business transactions para hindi kayo mangangapa at hahanapan kayo. Bakit? Kasi ang gobyerno natin, nakikip track niya yung sales nyo sa internet. No? So magkakaroon sila ng record dyan ng sales nyo. So it's up for you to show na may mga resibo kayo ng mga expenses, ng mga purchases nyo at patunayan nyo na ito lang yung net income nyo. Kasi kung wala kayong maipapakita, itatax kayo at gross ng 12% at saka yung net income nyo, kung ano yung benchmark sa industry, babayaran ninyo yun. No? So, mas mataas yun. As compared na meron kayong sariling computation at may sarili kayong documentation, hindi kayo matatax ng ganun kalaki. No? Ang katakutan ninyo dyan, na pagka napadala na kayo ng sulat at wala kayong dokumento na ipapakita. No? Kasi sila, yun po yung nilagay natin sa tax training natin na channel, yung lessons learned from the case of singer Claire de la Puente. No? Ano yung mga allegations niya doon na wala siyang operations, na hindi sila nag-operate, kaya hindi sila naka-register sa BIR, hindi sila nagbabayad ng tax. Pero wala siyang ipakita ng dokumento. No? So, kayo ganun din sa mga online sellers natin. Ang BIR, magkakaroon siya ng record ng income nyo doon sa internet. No? So, it's up to you to show to the BIR at ipakita na ito lang talaga yung kinita nyo dyan. Ito lang yung income tax. Ito lang ang income, kaya ito lang dapat yung income tax na babayaran nyo. So, paano ninyo gagawin yun? Meron kayong resibo pagbenta ninyo ng goods. At meron din kayong resibo ng mga expenses nung binili nyo. Kasi pag wala yung ganon, at saka yung income lang ang makikita ng BIR, then doon kayo i-assess sa best evidence obtainable, mas mataas yun. No? So, kasi ang gobyerno, pag wala siya makita ng dokumento, mas mataas yung computation niya ng net income. Pero kung may maipakita kayong dokumento na ito yung tama, then i-consider yan. No? Kaya, ang burden po talaga na mag-compute ng tamang tax sa isang taxpayer ay nasa taxpayer. No? At saka yung magtago ng mga resibo, mga dokumento, patungkol doon sa mga business transactions niya, requirement po yan sa isang nagbebenta ng goods and services or sa isang nagnenegosyo. Pag wala kayo ng ganyan, talaga magka-problema kayo. No? Kaya yung sabi natin na burdensome yung pagbabayad ng tax, nagiging burdensome lang po yan pag pinabayaan natin at hindi tayo nag-comply doon sa compliance requirements. No? Pero kung kompleto tayo, then nag-keep track natin. At isa pa doon, nakukompute natin yung tamang tax na papass on natin, na-add on natin sa ating pricing ng goods and services. Unlike na benta lang tayo ng benta dito, ay kumikita naman ako. No? Pero hindi yung natin na compute yung para sa tax. No? So it is our obligations talaga na magbabayad tayo ng tax. At first and foremost, nagre-record tayo sa ating post of accounts, sa mga dokumento natin. May question ba?
Ako, kay Ma'am Irish po ulit, ma'am.
Okay.
Sabi niya, referring to business po, ilan % ang penalty kapag late ang filing?
Pagka may basic tax po, 25% surcharge, tapos yung 12% interest per annum, at saka yung schedular po na compromise penalty ng BIR, depende po yan sa basic tax nyo. No? Pero kung, ano yung sabi niyang penalty? Pero kung wala kayong basic tax, halimbawa late filing lang, ang karamihan na ini-impose ng BIR, halimbawa no operation ka, is 1,000 per return. No? Pero kung meron kang gross, net loss ka, ini-base po nila sa gross income. No? So, yung penalty po, compute po yan sa examiner. No? Gagawa lang kayo ng form and then i-print nyo and then dalhin nyo sa examiner. Sila po yung magkukompute bago nyo bayaran sa bangko.
Wala na po. Shoutout lang po kay Ma'am RG. Nanonood po siya sa YouTube.
Si Ma'am RJ Bustamante. Talaga naman, masiyo pa ito. Miss RJ, kwentuhan tayo dito sa transfer pricing. No? Ito, ino-offer ko to sa basic transfer pricing. Just kay Miss RJ, ano na lang to, review. No? Kasi tapos na po siya nung certificate program natin na 5 days no, sa transfer pricing. But since doon kasi, parang kinumpress natin yung ating topics na 5 days lang about transfer pricing. Hindi natin na-discuss in details. Kaya nga sabi ko, itong transfer pricing guidelines, i-online streaming ko to para nahimay-himay natin at na yung phasing. Hindi ko siya bibilisan kasi para unti-unti maintindihan natin ng maayos at saka karoon tayo ng maraming examples, no, para hindi mahirap. Kasi yung iba, pag narinig lang transfer pricing, ay, ayoko dyan, mahirap yan. No? Hindi po siya mahirap, basta intindihin lang natin. No? Okay. Question?
Follow-up question po si Ma'am Irish. Kapag late ang filing of tax, saan po nag-base ng penalty? Sa sales po ba?
Sa sales po, kung may sales. No? Or sa basic tax, kung may basic tax. Una, basic tax muna kung may basic tax ka. Diyan ang basis ng penalty. Kung wala kang basic tax, sa gross na, no? Yun yung magiging basis po ng penalties. Hindi na yung 1,000. Yung 1,000 kung wala ka lang operation.
Galing naman po kay Ma'am Ann Ruby Ferrer.
Ann Ruby Ferrer. Shout out po. Saan to? Sa Facebook. Okay.
Sabi niya, ma'am, ask ko lang po, once na na-leak yung books na magpa-register kasi na-lockdown, may penalty po ba yun?
Oh, yes po, merong penalty. No, pag VAT ka 25,000. 'Yun po yung sa ano dito sa mga districts, no? Pero siguro kung reasonable, makiusap ka sa RDO. Diretso ka mismo, you write a letter and then explaining your side na late ka because of hindi na pipigilan. Pag justifiable naman po yung reasons nyo, then I think i-lower nila po yung penalties. Okay. Sige. Sige, along the way, ito po yung ano natin, online streaming tayo. Ang discussion natin is transfer pricing. But along the way, pwede po kayong mag-ask ng mga questions na concern po ninyo. No? Hindi tayo nakafocus lang po sa transfer pricing. Any other question, pwede po nating sagutin. Okay. Okay? Sige. Ilan pa yung sa YouTube natin?
Sa YouTube, ma'am, tatlo.
Sa Facebook?
Facebook, ma'am, 20.
Okay, sige. Thank you Thank you talaga mga ka-YouTubers at saka mga ka-Facebook. Okay? So, there is a domestic transfer pricing. Balik po tayo sa Revenue Regulations 2-2013, no? Ang sabi natin, di ba, yung cross-border, ang issue natin sa transfer pricing. So, dito naman, ano naman yung mga magiging issue natin sa domestic? Ibig sabihin na domestic, walang involved na iba na country, no? Within the one country lang, no? So, halimbawa, yung company na meron siyang special tax privileges. Ano yung special tax privileges? Ito yung sa Board of Investment or sa BOI na incentives. Ano yun? Yung mga tax holidays, no? So, depende kung anong pioneer business enterprise ka at bibigyan ka ng incentive ng Board of Investment, no, na 5 years or 3 years, 25% na income tax holiday. So, depende yun sa mag-grant sa inyo, no? Or, sa Philippine Economic Zone Authority naman, na yung sabi ko sa inyo, yung Pilipinas ngayon, meron tayong more than 200 na economic zones, no, all over the Philippines. At ano ang incentives dito? 5% in lieu of all taxes, no? So yun po yung tax rate lang na binibigay ang gobyerno, no? So special treatment. Okay. So, itong company daw, nagkakaroon ng transfer pricing issue. Pag itong company na may BOI incentives o kaya PESA registered, no? Kung yung expenses niya ng related company niya with special tax privileges sinishift niya to a related company subject to regular income tax. So, kahit na ang expenses incurred ng exempt entity, pinapasan niya doon sa regular na company para lumiit yung income. So, nilalakihan ang expenses para lumiit ang income, no? So, in other circumstances, so when income and our expenses are shifted to a related party to minimize tax liabilities. Kasi ano mangyayari pag nilakihan mo yung expenses? Relate yung income mo, no? At pag lumiit na yung income mo, liliit na rin yung tax liabilities mo o yung babayaran mo na tax, no? Okay, may question?
Wala pa po.
Okay. So, ano pong objective nitong kunin mo nga yung, excuse po YouTubers, kunin mo nga yung isang upuan. Sakit na din ang tuhod ko sa katayo. Ayun.
Malaki po.
Siyempre yung mataas dito. Pwede naman eh. Oh, okay. So, sandali lang po ha. 5 minutes break lang po. CCR lang. Ano mo muna to? Okay. So, balik na po tayo, mga ka-Facebook, ka-YouTubers. No? So, what is the objective of this Revenue Regulations 2-2013 or ito po yung ating transfer pricing guidelines, no? So, itong transfer pricing law po natin dito sa Pilipinas, ito yung Section 50 of the National Internal Revenue Code. I-explain natin mamaya sa inyo kung ano yan, no? So, itong Regulations 2-2013 has been promulgated pursuant to that Section 50 of the National Internal Revenue Code. Pero po, yung mga batas na sinusunod natin na o mga guidelines na pinapatupad natin or pinapairal natin when it comes to procedures at saka yung treatment, sinunod po natin yung OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines, no? Na yan din po yung basis ng transfer pricing guidelines in the world. So, with the transfer pricing guidelines po ng United Nations, no? So, dalawa po sila, and halos identical lang din naman po sila. Kasi, pareho sila na nag-adapt ng arm's length principle pagdating na po sa transfer pricing. Okay? So, anong objective and scope po nitong Revenue Regulations 2-2013? So, implement the authority of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue or the Commissioner to review controlled transactions, no? Kaya nga ang BIR may mga bagong regulations, no? Nandyan yan sa video po natin sa Basic Transfer Pricing. May mga video po tayo dyan sa YouTube channels natin explaining the Revenue Memorandum Circular 76-2020 at saka ito yung Revenue Regulations 19-2020 doon sa documentation po ng related party transactions na may form dyan na 1709 na pagka mayroon kayong mga related party transactions, i-fill up po ninyo yan at pag nag-file na kayo ng annual income tax return nyo, ilalagay po ninyo yun as attachment. No? Okay. So, implement the authority of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to review controlled transactions. Ano itong mga controlled transactions? Ito yung pinakita ko sa inyo sa board kanina na yung CA, ang parent company, meron siyang company na B at saka C, controlled po niya yun, no? Kasi bakit niya controlled? Kasi siya din ang nag-establish noon for a certain purpose na ginawa niyang distributor at saka yung isa ginawa niyang reseller, no? Okay. So, anong gagawin po dito? Allocate, distribute the income and deductions to determine the appropriate revenues and taxable income of the associated enterprises involved in controlled transactions. So, ang objective po talaga ng transfer pricing guidelines para po i-determine, no, na tama yung sales at saka tama yung deductions na kini-claim ng associated enterprises, no, that are involved in the controlled transactions or member of the group of companies. Ang tawag po diyan sa atin sa Pilipinas conglomerates, no? Ano to mga conglomerates na to? Ito yung mga group of companies na isa lang yung may-ari. Ano? Tawag sa atin dito conglomerates. Wala pang question?
Wala po. Pero nanonood po sa atin si Isis No Fernandez from Alberta, Canada.
Hello, baby AC Snow. Nakita mo na yung video mo. Ang dami natutuwa sa video ni AC Snow. And I hope na si AC Snow magiging vlogger na rin later on, no? Kasi napaka-cute ng mga videos niya, no? So, yung sa atin ngayon, since one world na lang po tayo, no? Kahit nandiyan kayo sa Canada, kami nandito sa Pilipinas, pero we can see each other through YouTube, through Facebook, no? At saka yung mga, alam nyo yung mga pictures ng bata na naglalaro, kahit na matanda ka pala, pag pinapanood mo, nakakataba din ng puso. Parang nakaka-cure ng depression, nakakatanggal ng lungkot sa puso mo. Kasi nakakatuwa po pag na may nakikita kang bata, no? Pero kung yung nakita mong matanda na puro problema, kaya sabi ko matanda na ako, pero ayokong makisama sa matatanda na puro problema ang kwento. Ayoko. Kasi bakit? Lalo tayo nadidepress, no? Napapaiksi yung buhay natin pag na-depress tayo. Kaya doon tayo sa yung mag-i-enjoy tayo, no? Kasi maiksi lang naman talaga ang buhay, eh. Hindi mo alam kung ano yung bukas. Pero yung buhay na nandito ka ngayon, enjoy mo. No? Huwag mong pahirapan yung sarili mo. Pag may problema, bayaan mo lang yung problema kasi temporary lang yan. No? Huwag mong gawin na yung pati yung sarili mo magiging focus ka na lang doon sa problema. No? So enjoy lang. Kaya kami, kahit na nag-adapt kami doon sa bagong normal, because sabi ko nga sa inyo, face-to-face lang yung alam namin sa seminar. So, we try talaga, kahit di kami marunong sa mga technical, so we try, no, unti-unti. Yung mga unang video natin, mga palpak, pero we try, no? Kaya nga, nanghihingi po kami ng feedback sa inyo, if you can give us suggestions, no, para mapaganda po yung ating live streaming, no? Okay. So, go back po tayo sa Revenue Regulations 2-2013. Ito pong tinatawag natin na Transfer Pricing Guidelines, no? Walang question? Okay. So, shout out. Sino pa yung shout out natin?
Si Norris Palada.
Okay.
Sabi niya, ma'am, watching, I believe I will learn a lot. Tapos
Norris?
watching po si Excalibur Escrima.
Nakita mo na yung mga platters ng Quattro Asian Bistro, no? Napakasarap. Ako, I also learned from maganda pala siya. No, parang kinonect lang namin dun sa channel ng Quattro Asian Bistro, yung pagkain. Kasi, hindi na kami makaisip na anong pang pagkain na gagawin natin, no? So, ang gaganda pala nung mga pagkain ng Quattro Asian Bistro, no? So, shout out sa mga taga-Canada, no? Marami tayong mga kaibigan dyan. Try po ninyo yung Quattro Asian Bistro. Hindi lang siya Filipino foods ang kinikater, Asian po talaga. At hindi lang basta-basta Asian, yung mga masasarap na Asian foods, no? So, andyan makikita ninyo yung mga examples natin. Okay. Sa Facebook sila nanonood. Okay, so, shout out.
Sabi po ni Sir Norris Palata, meron po kayo session how to fill up the new form in related party.
Yes po, tingnan po ninyo yung basic transfer pricing Philippines natin na YouTube. Meron po tayo dyan how to fill up BIR Form 1709 na attachment. Nandyan po. At diniscuss po natin dyan sa Revenue Regulations 19-2020. No? So buksan nyo lang po yung Basic Transfer Pricing Philippines na YouTube channel at makikita nyo po dyan. At saka marami na po kaming mga cases dyan na decided ng International Court about transfer pricing. Mga lawyers po natin ang mga na naging participants po natin doon sa 5-day certificate program po ng transfer pricing. Sila po yung nag-discuss. Kasi part po yan ng study nila, mga case studies. And then, nirecord po namin and we let it available to you para you will learn also from these decided cases po ng mga international courts about transfer pricing. Sige. Okay, so...
Meron pa nga isang question.
Okay, question.
Kay Ma'am Irish po, sabi, need po ba mag-file ng tax 2 months and a half lang po ang business? Di na po na-continue ang business simula ng lockdown, March 15. Since quarterly po ang filing.
Kailangan po nagpa-file. Kahit na po walang operations, once na-register po kayo sa BAR, ito po yung nagkakaroon ng mga open cases. Bakit? Kasi nagkakaroon sila ng open cases dahil yung ni-register nila na business sa BAR, pag wala na silang operations, stop na rin yung filing nila. Hindi po ganon. Kahit stop na yung operations ninyo, continue pa rin yung filing nyo. Bakit? Pag nagpa-register na po kayo sa BAR ng business, para na po kayo nakasakay sa taxi na naka-metro po, at yung computer natin, nag-assign sa inyo ng tax types, nag-assign sa inyo ng electronic ledger, tinitingnan nila ngayon, every month, every taxable period, tinitingnan nila, hinihintay nila yung inyong filing at saka payment, no? So kung wala kayong operation, filing lang, mag-file kayo para hindi kayo ma-open case. Ano itong open case? Ito yung mga returns or mga tax types na hindi ninyo na i-file dahil napabayaan lang ninyo, Pero generate na siya ng open cases dahil deadline na, no? Hindi natin na-file on time. So, iwasan po natin yan kasi ang open cases, may mga penalties po yan, no? Magkakaroon kayo ng penalties diyan. Okay. So, tuloy pa rin po yung pag-file kahit wala pong operations. Okay?
Wala na.
Okay. So, ilan pa yung sa Facebook natin?
80.
Sa, ano?
Tatlo po.
So, maintain. Maintain. Okay. Sige. Letter B po, ano po yung requirements natin, no? Sa objectives natin sa transfer pricing. Prescribe guidelines in determining the appropriate revenues and taxable income of the parties in the control transaction by providing for the methods of establishing an arm's length price. Okay. So, anong methods? I-discuss ko rin po to sa inyo. No? Anyway, mayroong discussions dito sa RR 2-2013 itong mga transfer pricing methods. Pero, i-discuss ko pa sa inyo separate na topic na puro methods lang talaga. No? Para nahimay-himay din natin. And very specific yung ating mga discussions. No? Pero dito, pahapyaw din dito sa transfer pricing guidelines na to. Meron tayong mga methods. No? At may sinasabi siya dito na arm's length price. Ano ba itong tinatawag na arm's length price, no? Meron tayong discussions diyan on the arm's length principle. Okay. So, letter C, in the objectives, require the maintenance or safekeeping of the documents, no? So, sinasabi ko na sa inyo, once you are a taxpayer, kasama po talaga sa obligasyon natin, hindi lang pagbabayad ng buwis, but kasama po sa obligasyon natin pag-maintain ng documentation. At ano yung documentation? Our books of accounts and our receipts, no? Lahat ng iba pa, yan lang po yung hahanapin sa atin. No? At saka yan talaga iikot yung sakit ng ulo natin pag wala tayong proper documentation ng ating business transactions. Okay? May question? Okay. So, ano to? Maintenance or safekeeping of the documents necessary for the taxpayer to prove that efforts were exerted to determine the arm's length price or standard in measuring transactions among associated enterprises. No? So, ano yung measuring transactions among associated enterprises? Marami to, no? May mga applications tayo dito pagdating na po sa mga transfer pricing issues, no? Okay. Ano itong sinasabi dito na standard? Itong arm's length, no? Arm's length standard. No? Pag ito pahapyaw lang, sabihin ko na sa inyo, ano ba itong arm's length standard? Yung arm's length standard based on the arm's length principle adopted by the international communities, no? As provided in the OECD Model Tax Convention. Ito pong arm's length principle, ito yung, ang sabi dito, yung mga related party transactions, ang pricing niyan dapat same or similar with the unrelated parties or the independent transactions. Bakit daw? Kasi kung related party transactions yan, ito yung sample ko sa inyo, meron niyang element of control dahil isa lang yung may-ari. So, dapat ang pricing talaga ng sapatos ay yung pricing ng independent na seller, distributor, or independent na manufacturer. Kasi, yun talaga ang totoong price dahil walang element of control at ano lang ang nag-i-influence nung price, ng independent price. Yun lang price in the market. And what is the factor that influence price in the market? The law of supply and demand, no? Pero walang element of control between the related parties. Kaya yun po yung susundan. So kung ano yung independent price ng shoes sa market, yun po yung susundin, hindi po yung price na dictated ng grupo, no? So,
Question.
okay.
Kay Ma'am Marge de la Cruz.
Okay, shout out po Ma'am Marge de la Cruz.
Naka-receive po ako ng letter from BIR. Meron po naka-attach na this open case year 2006 to 2019.
Wow! 2006, 2019.
Paano po babayaran yun?
14 years.
How to compute po penalty per record?
Kung no operation po kayo, ang gagawin nyo lang, gagawa kayo ng form, may nakalagay naman dyan sa open case kung anong klaseng tax type yan. No? So kung withholding yan, 1601C is compensation, 1601 is expanded. O kung VAT naman yan, gagawa kayo ng 2050M at saka 2050Q. Kung income naman, 1701Q. Kung individual, 1702Q naman kung corporations dun sa quarterly. At saka yung 1702 at saka 1701 para dun sa annual. No? And then dadalhin po ninyo yan sa BIR at pa-compute ninyo yung penalties doon, no? Ang alam ko na penalties ng BIR yung 2016 and prior, tig to 200 lang po yan per open case. Pero yung 2017 na and above, 1,000 na per open case, no? Kung wala kang operation. Pero kung meron ka declared na operations, iba pa yan, ibe-base pa po yan doon sa actual na computation mo. Halimbawa, BAT, ang compute yan, 12% ng sales mo, less 12% ng purchases mo na may mga input taxes, yun na yung VAT payable mo. Yun yung kukumputan ng penalties na 25% surcharge, 20% interest per annum, at saka compromise penalty na graduated based on the schedule ng BIR. No? So, pa-compute nyo po talaga sa kanila.
Kay Ma'am Irish po ulit, ma'am. In filing ITR, ano po ang pagkakaiba ng individual filing of ITR or joint po ang filing?
Ang joint filing po para yan sa mag-asawa, no? Husband and wife are required to compute their income tax separately, pero ang default po talaga dyan ay magpa-file sila ng joint filing, no? Sa iisang ITR, no? Pero kung may mga valid reasons, halimbawa nasa abroad yung asawa o kaya legally separated na, hindi na alam kung nasaan ang asawa at large na kasi pumunta sa ibang bakod o sa ibang bahay, no? So hindi na talaga makita ng wife or ng husband. So pwede na siyang mag-file na separately, hindi kasama yung spouse. Pero kung magkasama pa sila, the default is you file jointly, no? So by jointly mean, meron pong column dyan sa income tax return natin for the taxpayer and for the spouse, no? So fill up nyo lang po yan, and then i-compute nyo yung magkano yung income ng husband and ng wife, and then i-compute nyo. Pagdating na dun sa tax, doon nyo i-consolidate, no? So isang return lang po yan. Pero yung sinasabi mo naman na individual filing po doon sa mga hindi married, no? Or walang asawa. Pero sa mga may asawa, joint filing po ang requirements.
Kay Ma'am Irish po ulit, ma'am. Kahit po ba stop operation ang business, no, since then di nag-file ng tax, may penalty pa rin?
Yes po. Ang pinipenalty po dyan sa inyo is, ang tawag dyan, non-filing. Kasi hindi kayo nag-file na dapat nag-file kayo, no? Kasi hindi naman ang hahanapin yun, doon is tax payment. Kasi wala talaga kayong dapat na bayaran na tax payment. Kasi nga, no operation, lockdown, no? Wala naman talagang business during the lockdown. So, dapat nag-file pa rin kayo. Kasi, computerized po ang BIR. So, kahit nag-lockdown yan, 24/7, nagpa-function po yung computer ng BIR. So, nagko-compute pa rin siya naghihintay pa rin siya ng filing, no? So yung filing naman kasi BIR na i-submit mo na lang online, no? Pero since ang sa inyo is i-file mo muna online and then i-print mo and then dalhin mo sa BIR for the computation of penalties.
Okay na po.
Okay. So doon pa tayo sa objectives kasi ini-explain ko na sa inyo kung ano yung arm's length principle na inadapt po ng transfer pricing. Transfer pricing is not only in the Philippines, ha? Transfer pricing is worldwide, no? And this is the tool na makukolekta ng isang tax authorities like the BIR yung tax na para talaga dito sa Pilipinas babayaran, no? Kasi halimbawa, group of companies yan. Yung iba na sa Europe, yung iba na sa US, yung iba na sa Africa, yung iba na sa China, yung iba sa Thailand or sa Asia, no? Iisa lang yung kanilang operations, halimbawa, pero present sila all over the world. No? So, paano itatax yung bawat isa? No, may computation diyan na sinasabi sa atin ng transfer pricing para naman itong company dito sa Pilipinas na sabihin na natin wala namang negosyo pero ang ginawa niya serbisyo lang para sa ibang company. Magkakaroon din siya ng income, no? Kasi hindi lang siya puro net loss dito sa Pilipinas, no? Magkaroon siya ng share ng income worldwide. Kasi bakit? Kasi nagko-contribute naman siya eh. May contribution siya doon sa overall na business nationwide. Kasi may pinoprovide siya ng services. So, dapat lang, ang sabi ng transfer pricing na magbayad din siya ng income tax dito sa Pilipinas. No? Hindi lang puro net loss or reimbursement of expenses. Okay? Wala. Okay. Alam niyo, natutuwa ako dito sa online eh, no? Kasi para kang minsan feeling mo sira ulo kasi nagsasalita ka, ikaw lang mag-isa, wala kang makikitang tao, no? Kita mo camera lang. Pero ang maganda lang diyan dahil alam mo na nasa kabilang dako ng mga cameras na yan, may mga tao din, no? So, ilan yung sa Facebook natin? 19 sa YouTube.
Tatlo pa rin.
Okay, so maintain, okay? So, these regulations, ibig sabihin itong Revenue Regulations 2-2013, apply to cross-border transactions between associated enterprises and domestic transactions between associated enterprises. So, pag sinabi natin cross-borders, iba't ibang bansa ang involved. Pag sinabi nating domestic transactions, dito lang sa Pilipinas. Pero alam nyo, since assigned ako sa BAR for 29 years, I do audit work. Ang dami pong issues talaga sa domestic transactions. More so on the cross-border transactions. Mas lalong marami. No? Kaya, alam nyo, maganda yung audit. But ang inayawan ko lang when I was assigned in the large taxpayer, yung magta-travel. No? Kasi sakop ko yung Visayas Mindanao, doon ako mag-audit. No, pag nag-deliver ka ng letter authority, sasakay ka ng aeroplano, kaya barko, hindi na kaya, no, ng katawan. Pag sumakay ako sa aeroplano, parang pumuputok yung aking tenga, kasi high blood na. No, so, may pressure kasi sa loob ng, ng aeroplano eh. No? So, hindi na kaya. That's why, nag-early retirement ako sa BAR, no? And I choose na dito ako sa training, no? Kasi love ko yung training eh, yung lecture. Kaya ito na yung buhay ko ngayon, puro ako lecture. But, of course, doon sa 29 years ko na experience sa audit, sinishare ko po sa inyo. Why? Para din mapulutan po natin ng leksyon at saka magkaroon tayo ng preparations, no? Kasi talagang sa buhay natin, preparation is very important. Para bang boxing na hindi mo hintayin na tamaan ka muna ng suntok bago ka dumepensa, bago ka umilag, no? Yung tinamaan ka na, hilo ka na bago ka gagalaw. Wag ganun, no? Dapat proactive tayo sa buhay natin, no? Okay. Wala pa? Okay. So, pero nandiyan pa sila. Kikinig pa. Alam niyo, very particular ako kung may nakikinig pa o wala na. Kasi nga, sabi ko nga sa inyo, wala kasi ako nakikitang tao. No? So, pasensya na po kayo. No? So, purpose of the regulations. The regulations seek to provide guidelines in applying the arm's length principle for cross-border and domestic transactions between associated enterprises. Oh, so ano yan? Ano yan? Mic? Mic para yan sa Facebook. So mahina pero naririnig tayo. Okay, sige. These guidelines are largely based on the arm's length methodologies as set out under the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, no? Or OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. CR lang ako. CR lang po, sandali. Okay.
May mga question ulit.
O sige. Questions mo tayo. Bukas na tong isang mic. Yung sa Facebook. Okay. Sige, questions.
Galing po kay Sir Norris Palada.
Okay.
Ma'am, ask ko po, if no transaction, zero amount of filing, need pa ba ng e-submission for the quarter?
E-submission for the quarter. Ano yung e-submission? Yung sa EBIR, di ba? Kailangan po. Kailangan po. Basic po talaga yan. Kasi kung hindi mo siya idaan sa e-submission, hindi siya papasok po doon sa database ng BIR. No? So, kailangan po.
Kay Ma'am Irish po ulit, ma'am. Ma'am, ano po ma-advise niyo sa mga online seller na hindi nagbibigay ng OR? Kasi ang OR serves as your warranty. Ano po ang habol dito? Sakali magkaroon ng defect ang product, in your own opinion.
Sa batas po kasi, ang pag-usapan natin yan yung batas no, sa commercial transactions. Ang resibo is a commercial document, no? And ano yung purpose ng resibo? Proof po siya, ebidensya po siya na may bentahan, no? Kaya bakit pinipenalize ng gobyerno yung mga hindi nag-i-issue ng resibo? Kasi ang ibig sabihin lang dyan, hindi nila nire-recognize at hindi nila nire-report sa gobyerno na mayroon silang sales, no? At saka ano ang implication pa doon? Pagka halimbawa nagka-problema sa sales, hindi nila i-acknowledge, no? Kaya parang panluloko po yung hindi nag-i-issue ng resibo, no? So yun ang implications diyan. So anong mangyayari dito sa mga hindi nag-i-issue ng resibo, pinapabayaan lang, wala silang documentation, wala ring reporting. Yun na po, yung balikan na natin yung sabi ko sa inyo na lessons learned from the case of singer Claire de la Puente, no? Ano yung nangyari po doon sa case na yan? Yung sabi ko sa inyo na ang allegations niya, no operations, pero wala siya mapapakita ng dokumento. Ang nagpakita ng dokumento na meron talaga siyang operations ang BIR at saka ang LTO. Why? Kasi yung nature ng business nila is transportation, no? Bus company. So, anong pinakita na ebidensya ng LTO at ng BIR? Yung kanilang mga franchises na 19 franchises yung awarded sa kanila at that time. At saka yung 237 buses na nagbabiyahe, no? So, anong pinakita doon sa mga nagbabiyahe na yun? Yung pinakita doon, yung mga ticket ng LTO sa mga, at saka ng pulis dun sa mga violations ng buses habang nagbabiyahe, no? So those are very glaring o kaya napakabigat po na ebidensya against Miss Claire de la Puente. That's why anong conviction sa kanya? 7 counts of criminal yung penalties sa kanya, no? May kulong kasi hindi niya na-report, no? Kaya iwasan po natin 'yan. Earlier pa lang na binigyan pa na tayo ng pagkakataon ng gobyerno, gawin na natin para hindi na natin hintayin yung filean tayo ng kaso. Kasi wala nga 'yan ngayon, but later on alam mo namang darating. So anticipate na natin at gagawa na tayo ng action ngayon pa lang, no? Para very friendly pa po yung approach ng government sa atin. Hindi na tayo dadalhin sa korte at saka kakasuhan pa, no? Okay. So, ano po yung purpose ng regulations? Wala nang questions?
Wala. Si Ma'am Ferreira lang good dito.
Buti si Ma'am Fe. Noong nag-Zoom tayo ng tax updates, hindi siya maabot, no? Sila ni Ma'am Sonia Angeles, no? Meron po tayo sa mga PSTRI members natin at saka sa ating mga tax advisors group, meron tayo ulit na tax update sa 28, ha. I hope nakarating na sa inyo yung notification, no? Via Zoom po yon 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, no? So via Zoom. Free po yan sa mga PSTRI members natin. Ano yung isang pag-usapan po natin doon, yung tungkol sa voluntary assessment program ng BIR ngayon for the year or for the taxable year 2018. No, pag-usapan natin yun. O, doon sa mga hindi pa members at saka gustong magpa-members po sa tax advisors group natin o kaya sa PSTRI, ang singil po namin dyan na membership fee is 1,000 per year. No? So sa 1,000 per year na po yan, meron na kayong libreng tax updates at saka yung mga queries at saka yung mga discussions, no? So meron na po tayo. Yun yung mga benefits na may ibigay natin. Okay? Ngayon, ang binibigay pa lang namin sa inyo puro updates ng taxation, but hopefully in the next time mag-i-expand na po 'yan with updates sa labor, no, updates sa local taxation, no. I-expand po natin yung serbisyo natin sa inyo. Update sa SEC, sa mga SEC requirements para mas kumbaga sa lahat ng area ng services na ino-offer ng mga tax advisors at saka ng mga bookkeepers, matatakil po natin lahat, no? Pero unti-unti lang kasi kung mapapansin ninyo, dati marami akong mga researchers. Ngayon, since budgeting, wala pong business, no? Nagkonti na lang din po yung ating empleyado. Kaya, unti-unti lang. But hopefully, we will improve our services, especially to the members. No? Okay. So, ano po yung purpose ng regulations? Provide guidelines in applying the arm's length principle for cross-border and domestic transactions between associated and enterprises. When we say associated enterprises, ito yung mga enterprises na may common control or may mga related parties or members of the group, no? So nasa grupo sila, no? So the guidelines are largely based on the arm's length methodologies as set out under the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Transfer Pricing Guidelines. Ano po itong Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development? Ito po yung OECD. No? Ano tong OECD? Sila po yung nagmamaan ng Center for Tax Policy and Administration of the World. Administration of the World, na bubulol ang dila ko, no? Ano po itong OECD? Nasa Paris, France po sila. This is a non-stock, non-profit organizations funded by the international communities, no? So, ilan ang member countries nito? Marami na, no? More than 60 na. And sila yung gumagawa ng mga policies natin sa tax administration, no? Yung mga ginagawa nilang tax policies were done through consultations, deliberations, and then pag nabuo na po nila, kagaya nitong arm's length principle and transfer pricing, kinakaskade po yan at ina-adapt ng mga tax authorities all over the world. And ano po yung purpose ng OECD? Better policies for better lives, no? Kaya pinag-aaralan lahat ng policies, may mga feedbacks, and then bago po yan i-cascade, bago i-finalize, na talagang nare-refine na, no? Hindi lang naman during the deliberation yung tax authorities lang yung present, pati din po yung mga tax practitioners at saka mga taxpayers, no? Kaya na di-discuss mabuti yung mga issues bago po nagkaroon ng policies. At dito nga po sa transfer pricing, after deliberations, talagang isa lang yung kanilang na-adapt na effective on this transfer pricing na tax evasion, at ito nga po yung arm's length principle, no? At ano po yung arm's length principle adopted by the OECD? Ito yung kung ano yung transactions ng independent transactions, yun ang totoong transactions. At ang transactions between related parties or within the group, kino-compare po yan sa transactions ng independent parties, at pag may discrepancy, nagkakaroon po ng adjustment. No? Kailan nangyayari yung adjustment? Pag magkaiba yung presyo ng independent party at ang presyo ng related parties. No? So, anong magiging result ng adjustment? The result of the adjustment is deficiency taxes. No? Kasi may kulang, kaya nga nag-adjust dahil hindi pareho. Okay? Okay. Authority of the Commissioner to allocate income and deductions. Ito yung nandyan sa Section 50 of the Tax Code. Ano yung Section 50 of the Tax Code? The Commissioner is authorized to distribute a portion. Ang Section 50 po ng National Internal Revenue Code natin, yan po yung transfer pricing law in the Philippines. And word for word, that is exactly the provision in the IRC, Internal Revenue Code of the United States, Section 482. Kunin mo nga yung tax code ko, ayun, no? Basahin ko sa kanila yung Section 50. Ayun, sa ilalim. Wag. Okay. Maingay. Okay. So ito po yung Section 50, basahin ko sa inyo ha, na itong sabi ko sa inyo na this is the transfer pricing law in the Philippines. Ito po yung Section 50 po ng National Internal Revenue Code natin, no? Hindi po ito na update ng train law, no? So ito pa rin. So ano sinabi po dito sa Section 50? Allocation of income and deductions, no? So in the case of two or more organizations, trades or businesses, whether or not incorporated and whether or not organized in the Philippines, owned or controlled directly or indirectly by the same person, by the same interests, the Commissioner is authorized to distribute a portion or allocate, no? So tatlo yung pwede niyang gawin. No? Distribute, a portion, allocate. Gross income or deductions between or among such organizations, trade or business, if he determines that such distribution, apportionment, or allocation is necessary in order to prevent evasion of taxes or clearly to reflect the income of any such organizations, trades, or business, no? So yun po yung sinasabi ng Section 50, which is the transfer pricing law in the Philippines. Nandyan po yan sa tax code natin. Okay. Okay. So let's now go to the definition of terms under this RR 2-2013, no? Question? Ilan na yung sa ating YouTube? 8. Sa Facebook?
10 po sa
Sa 10. Okay. Bumaba ano pa yan ng time out. Okay. So, sa definition of terms po natin, let's now go to definition of terms. To the controlled transaction under examination, taking factors such as the nature of the property or services provided between the parties. So functional analysis of the transactions and parties, contractual terms, and economic conditions. Kasi dito po sa tinatawag natin na comparable transactions, ito po yung balikan natin ang arm's length principle. Nasabi natin sa arm's length principle, magko-compare ka ng transactions ng independent parties at ng related parties, no? So, kaya maghahanap ka ngayon ng comparable na transaction, no? Comparable to the controlled transaction. So, ano yan? Independent transaction. Okay. Ano naman ibig sabihin ng comparable uncontrolled transaction? No? A comparable uncontrolled transaction is a transaction between two independent parties that is comparable to the controlled transactions under examination. So, kaya nga sabi dito, comparable uncontrolled transaction. So, uncontrolled meaning independent. Hindi siya controlled. Hindi siya within the group. No? So, it can be either a comparable transaction between one party to the controlled transaction and an independent party or internal comparable, or between two independent parties, neither of which is a party to the controlled transaction or the external comparable. So dito sa comparable uncontrolled transaction, meron po siyang sinasabi na internal comparable at meron din siyang sinasabi na external comparable. Pag sinabi po natin internal comparable within the group, no? So pag sinabi mo internal comparable, i-compare mo si A kay B o kaya si B, compare mo kay C. No? Pwede yan. Internal comparable ang tawag dyan. Pag sinabi mo namang external comparable, meron halimbawang XYZ na company dito na iba, na independent party, doon mo i-compare naman ang transaction na ABC. Yun po yung tinatawag naman na external comparable. Okay. Associated enterprises. Two or more enterprises are associated if one participates directly or indirectly in the management, control, or capital of the other. Or if the same persons participate directly or indirectly in the management, control, or capital of the enterprises. These are also referred to as related parties. Ito po wordings ito ng Revenue Regulations 2-2013, no? So anong sabi niya sa related parties? Sa associated enterprises, referred also as related parties, no? Itong associated enterprises. So related parties siya. Bakit? Kasi ang directly or indirectly, same lang na tao participate in the management, control, or capital of the other, no? So halimbawa yung investor over the investee, no? So meron siyang participation kasi allowed siya under the law. Halimbawa meron kang ownership ng shares of stocks ng isang company, more than 51% ang ownership mo doon. So, allowed ka. Why? Kasi may voting power ka na doon sa company as vested in the shares of stocks that you acquire. No? Sinabi mo na kaagad. Why? Kasi represented ka na ng 51% sa. So, anong ibig sabihin kung 51%? Wins ka na. Kahit anong desisyon na. If sila, panalo ka pa rin. So, yung desisyon ng majority ang company. So, or, basta sabi mo rin na related parties, kung same persons participate directly or indirectly in the management, control, or capital of the enterprises. Ibig sabihin ng same person can be members of the company, no? Na sila yung nandiyan dyan at participate in the management ng company. Nandiyan na naman po yung kidlat, no? Commercial tayo. Kasi yung aking pamangkin, no, end of the month pa pala siya ilibing, no, kasi na tinamaan ng kidlat is only 27 years old yung nandyan sa Canlaon, no, dalawa sila na tinamaan ng kidlat habang nagtatrabaho sa farm. Kaya pala, tuwing ganitong oras dito, napakalakas po ng kidlat, kaya nakakababa kasi nakaka-trauma, no. Anong slide number yan? 159. 159? Kasi na ano siya bigla. Okay. No? So, yun po. At ngayon, ang lakas na naman ng kidlat dito. Kaya nakakaalala. No? Yung, meron akong ginawa dyan na tips to avoid for life by Mami Elsa kasi makakatulong po yan sa atin. Do not take for granted yung lightning kasi kumikitil po siya ng buhay. Okay. So, control. Napaka-importante po ng definition ng control. Sometimes, nagkakatalo sa jurisdiction, sa jurisprudence ng kaso, yun lang salitang control, no? Pag napatunayan ng korte na there is control over the company, din talo na yung allegations ng isa. Why? Kasi pag sinabi mo kasi na control, excuse me, ibig sabihin hindi na totoo, hindi na reflective ng independent party transactions, yung transactions, kasi kontrolado siya. No? Gumagalaw yan.
Sir,
Ah, okay. Kala ko may multo. No? Okay. So, control refers to any kind of control, direct or indirect, whether or not legally enforceable, and however exercisable or exercised, no? So, control shall be deemed present if income or deductions have been arbitrarily shifted between two or more enterprises. Bakit sinishift, no? Kagaya dito, no? Instead na, halimbawa, yung manufacturer, ang cost niya is 300. Since gusto niya na walang income si distributor, ipasa din niya ng 500, no? And then, magmamark up na lang si distributor dyan ng 50. So, 550, 50 na lang yung income na i-report niya dito, no? O si B naman, gusto niya malaki yung income ni retailer, no? So 550 niya ipasa, no? Ibebenta ng 1,000. So 450 ang gross profit ni C. So malaki yung net income niya. So yun po yung tinatawag na controlled transactions, no? Pwede nilang i-control sa dami ng mga company nila. Pwede nilang i-control dito sa isang company, lakihan nila. Dito sa isang company, babaan nila yung presyo, no? So depende kung saan sila magkakaroon ng savings. Pwede ba natin ipakita yung Al Jazeera? Hindi, no? Baka ma-question tayo.
Sa ano ma'am? Sa YouTube pwede, pero sa cellphone, sa Facebook.
O baka ano tayo ng Al Jazeera? No?
Baka
Sa bagay, fair use naman ito because we are using it for discussions, no? Di ba? Pwede naman siguro.
sa YouTube ko lang siya makapakita.
Pwede. Paano?
Facebook, ma'am, hindi.
Bawal?
Hindi kasi siguro ano ko na lang. Dito ko na lang i-focus sa screen niyo.
I-acknowledge na lang natin yung Al Jazeera, no? No, so our discussion will give us the explanation po kasi meron kaming mga clippings na video po ng Al Jazeera that will explain to us kung ano yung mga ginagawang mga scheme nitong mga companies, no, na mga controlled na transactions para makatipid po sila ng taxes. Pero tapusin ko na lang itong definition of terms, no? So controlled transactions means transaction between two or more associated enterprises, and independent enterprises or parties are independent with respect to each other if they are enterprises. Pag independent ka, walang controlled, no? Walang controlled transactions between you and the other parties, no? Advanced pricing arrangement, ito po yung arrangement na gagawa ka ng transfer pricing analysis report and then pa-approve mo sa BIR, no, dito sa Pilipinas, para hindi ka subject sa transfer pricing audit. In short, itong advanced pricing arrangement, ito na po yung pinaka-tax ruling. Kukuha ka ng ruling as to your transactions para hindi ka isa-subject sa transfer pricing audit at ipapakita mo doon, magkakaroon ka ng mga critical assumptions na ang pricing mo ng goods and services mo is tama, no? So yun po yung ibig sabihin ng advanced pricing arrangement, no? Mutual agreement procedure, ito naman po yung dispute resolution ng parties dito sa Pilipinas and the other parties abroad pagdating na po sa mga cross-border transactions na may issue po ng transfer pricing, no? So paano po ginagawa itong mutual agreement procedure? Different tax authorities will participate in the dispute resolution at mag-usap po sila paano nila i-resolve. Especially meron na pong issue dyan on double taxation, no? At saka siguro yung mga issues about the tax pag-uusapan nila. pwede, Hari? O paano yung Facebook, hindi nila makikita? I-ano na lang siguro yung camera. Oh, sige. Sige. May ipapakita po kami sa inyo na video, no? This is 2010 pa, matagal-tagal na, pero dito pinag-uusapan po yung about taxation na makaka-relate din po para maintindihan ninyo itong pinag-aaralan natin na transfer pricing. No? And my acknowledgement is video po ito ng Al Jazeera na papakita po namin sa inyo for our discussions, for discussion purposes. No? So, yan mo na rin. Sa TV na lang, tapos i-focus mo yung camera dyan. Tsaka yung, ano, para makita both sa Facebook at saka sa Okay? So, please take note po na yung video natin, may mga dinidiscuss doon about economics, no? Kasi ang transfer pricing po is economic taxation. At dito po sa transfer pricing, tinitingnan yung mga economic activities ng isang entity kung magko-conform ba siya sa arm's length principle. Kasi pag hindi, pwede po siyang i-disallow and then the proper adjustment should be made and then computation and efficiency taxes. Okay? Tapos itong camera,
Hindi, okay.
paano niya makita?
Yes, ma'am. May software dyan. Sa Facebook naman.
So tatanggalin ko na to.
Ako,
So, hindi na ako maririnig nila.
A new report shows some of the world's richest people hid more than $30 trillion in offshore tax havens. Should these tax avoidance institutions be allowed to exist? And why do wealthy individuals hide their money abroad? Is it greed or lack of trust in their governments? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. A couple of weeks ago, we learned that Barclays traders had been deliberately lying about fixing LIBOR interest rates to maximise their own profits on currency dealings. A week later, we heard that one of the world's biggest banks, HSBC, has apologised for allowing drugs gangs to launder billions of dollars. Now, we're told the super rich and their families are hiding away as much money as the combined GDPs of the US and Japan, a staggering $32 trillion. Yes, that's 32, followed by 12 noughts. Out of an estimated world population of 7 billion people, just 10 million people hold offshore accounts containing $32 trillion. And half of that amount is owned by just 100,000 people. They surely are the super rich. It's thought that $500 billion has left Russia since 1990, and so the tax on that money has not been invested in the home country. In sub-Saharan Africa, if governments there had been able to tax the many hundreds of billions sent abroad, it would have been enough to pay off their crippling debts. Despite the criticism it can attract, the process is legal and is used on a daily basis by banks around the world. Well, tax loopholes and tax havens are exploited by multinationals and the super rich to avoid paying high taxes. If tax evasion is a crime, tax avoidance aims to pay the minimum possible without still breaking the law. Among the recent high-profile cases is the British comedian Jimmy Carr, who in one scheme managed to shelter $5.2 million a year. Prime Minister David Cameron described the comedian's arrangements as morally wrong. But when French President François Hollande pledged to tax the super rich at 75%, Cameron invited wealthy French individuals to emigrate to the UK in order to avoid the tax. As for the companies in the United Kingdom, Vodafone and the Topshop Arcadia Group also are accused of avoiding tax. Topshop's owner has been criticised for living in a tax haven and still using public services, but without wanting to pay for them. Another recent case is how the world's most profitable technology company sidestepped paying billions in taxes. Apple was a pioneer of an accounting technique known as the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. It reduces taxes by routing profits through Irish subsidiaries in the Netherlands and then to the Caribbean. Today, that tactic is used by hundreds of other corporations. So, why do tax havens exist, and should they continue to exist? To answer that question and many others, we're joined by our guests in Geneva. Jean-Pierre Dizerend is a General Secretary of the Convention of Independent Financial Advisors. Also in Geneva, Mirat Zaki, and she is a best-selling financial author who wrote Banking Secrecy is Dead, Long Live the Tax Evasion. She's also the deputy editor of the financial magazine Bilan. And in Brussels, Sony Kapoor is the managing director of Redefine, an international think tank that advises governments and policymakers on economic and financial sector policy. Welcome to all of you. But I'm going to start with Mirat Zaki. $21 trillion is being hidden in offshore bank accounts. Is there any evidence of illegality by corporations and rich individuals there?
Well, first I need to say that there is a double standard. Switzerland has no longer the right to hide offshore assets, at least from Europe and the US. But in other places like the Delaware and Wyoming US states, like Jersey and Guernsey, things are totally different. There is much financial opacity there and still many offshore accounts that are allowed to be there. And when you talk about illegality, well, I would say that tax avoidance, if it is aggressively done, it can fringe on tax evasion. And if it is aggressive tax evasion, it can fringe on tax fraud. So, you know, it is a continuum. And there is much subjectivity and arbitrariness in judging what is legal and illegal. But I would say that in any case, I deem it rather illegitimate. That's for sure. There is too much of that money going out of countries, and I believe it is never coming back because it has enjoyed so much such top-level financial advice, and it is structured in such complex and sophisticated Anglo-Saxon entities that it's very difficult to detect and to dismantle.
Oh, so it's the Anglo-Saxons' fault, is it? Jean-Pierre Disserens, you heard what Mazzaki had to say, more illegitimate than illegal. What's your view? Are offshore banks and their customers doing anything wrong?
Well, what the offshore banks and their customers are doing is using the law and, to a certain extent, abusing the law, which the Anglo-Saxon structures gives them entirely the possibility to do. So if we're talking about people trying to pay less taxes, taxes is just an expense on your P&L. And if you legally, through complicated structures, can save money to have that money invested in other things than just paying off governments who have managed their accounts in a terrible way over the last 20 years and reinvest that money in productive industry, and they use the legal way to do it, so be it, you know. What we have to know is that there are two things in the offshore money. There is the money, I think, that has been earned honestly in honest business, and then there is another part of money that's much darker, and that's the money of organized crime. And I believe that right now, when we look at what is happening with the governments ultimately are trying, because of their dramatic mismanagement of public funds, trying to recuperate the money they have willingly let go into tax havens by not accusing themselves for having let this go, but by accusing those companies who have taken the benefit that was offered to them.
Of hiding their money. Sonia Kapoor, you're sitting in Brussels. What do Europe's major policymakers of offshore tax havens and tax avoidance there?
Well, before I go into that, I think if you don't mind, I'd just like to comment on what's been said. I think it's very appropriate to say that there are shades of grey. There's a whole spectrum from tax avoidance to tax fraud. And it's also true that there's legitimate wealth which is undertaxed and there's criminal wealth. That having been said, there are two elements that are common to this whole discussion. And those two elements are there are regimes that have low tax rates, 0 to very low tax rate. Many of the tax havens have 0. Ireland has 12.5%. And the second very crucial element is secrecy. And it's the combination of these two that actually makes tax havens very attractive destinations for money that is tax avoiding, tax evasion, for criminal enterprises, for corrupt proceeds, including dictators from third world countries.
So what would you do, Sonia? What would Brussels do? What would Brussels do? Would they make them less secret? Would they make them more accountable? Do you say to the Cayman Islands, do you say to Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Bermuda, OK, you've got to open your books to us?
Yes. So there's several things that can be done. One is what you can do at the source. And several countries have taken some steps. So there have been cases in the United Kingdom where the government has forced banks to reveal the names of their offshore clients. That's one step that could be replicated. The second thing is tackle the intermediaries. It's the financial service providers, accounting firms, legal firms, as well as banks. And the HSBC case is an example. By making the financial intermediaries liable, you significantly choke the flow of such money. And the third is action against tax havens. And the US has demonstrated some advantage of this. The US is punching its economic weight to get islands such as the Cayman Islands and with the UBS deals, countries such as Switzerland, to take a much more cooperative approach. The European Union has failed to do that, where every country is trying to act on its own, and it doesn't help that Luxembourg and Austria are tax havens of their own nature. So we need a collective response where the threat of sanctions, of choking off flows to these countries is enough to ensure more compliance and cooperation.
OK, well, let's have a look at tax havens, that issue, seeing as you raised it. And then, Marit, we'll come to you for an answer. We spoke to the economist John Christensen from the Tax Justice Network, an organisation which is, as you all know, fiercely critical of tax havens.
In many cases, it's the politicians and their cronies and their families and so on, and the business people who sponsor the political parties who are using these offshore services themselves. So they've got no personal interest in closing it down. If they wanted to close it down, they could do it tomorrow. You know, it's not a question of rocket science. It's not difficult to do that. All they have to do is to improve information exchange between countries. They can require disclosure of information about offshore accounts, offshore companies, offshore trusts. The fact of the matter is they don't want to do it because they themselves are complicit with the process.
Marit Zaki, let's bring you in on this one.
Yeah.
Tax systems are complex, and what is acceptable may not always be clear. And we've just heard from Sony Kapoor asking for more transparency. Is that likely?
Yes. No, well, there is considerable limitations to this very honest policy that he recommends. First, there is the double standards issue. The fact that the Caribbean and Florida tax havens and Wyoming and Delaware and Nevada are places that are protected by the US government. They don't want to touch these places, so that even nowadays they remain opaque and they refuse to exchange information with countries such as Brazil or Mexico, whom taxpayers are evading towards the US shores. The second issue is that there are certain entities that are totally escaping nowadays any kind of information exchange. And I think of the international trust. There are types of international trust, such as the discretionary and irrevocable trust and foundations of the same kind. Those structures are very expensive and are so difficult to detect and to identify and to trace back to the beneficiary that you simply cannot exchange any type of information. They escape all the treaties and conventions that have been signed between countries, so that if you're a big wealthy family and you put your money there, there's no amount of government investigation and power that will be able to detect those entities. And I have concrete examples of extremely rich French families who have organized their wealth in such a way, using several multi-jurisdictions actually, and you can never find them back. So unfortunately, first there is the lack of willingness that John Christensen said, and Mr. Kapoor said that we could really find ways to make them disclose those jurisdictions, but there is real secrecy there, financial secrecy, not banking secrecy, financial secrecy surrounding those entities in the Caribbean and Pacific jurisdiction and Asian jurisdictions that make it impossible to apply those transparency policies.
OK, well, we're looking at the big banks as well, but Jean-Pierre Dizerens, I wonder if you think, I mean, does anybody know how much you earn? Probably not, because you're not going to tell people how much you earn. Money is a very private issue, and you're not going to get governments or banks releasing details of individual accounts, are you?
Well, you know, the privacy issue is certainly something wealthy people will always defend, because right now in this world, to be rich can be very dangerous, and one has to be very careful when they have money. Don't forget that rich people have been the targets of defamation over the last years. We hear, you know, everybody attacks rich people. And why
Well, that's
are being
jealousy.
rich
That's normal.
people
You always
attacked?
attack rich people because you're jealous they've got so much money. But the point is, nobody is going to release information. And the tax havens are not accountable to anybody, are they?
Well, the tax havens, is it correct to say tax havens?
Well, that's what they are.
Isn't it a financial safe haven where people can direct their investments the way they feel they can do it? Best do it for themselves and for the future of the money they have earned honestly. And I like to insist on the term honestly, because we have to be very careful not to mix the criminal money with the money that has been generated from
Well, this is a very important point, Jean-Pierre, because how can you tell down there in the vaults which money has come from money laundering and which money has come from somebody's piggy bank somewhere, somebody's savings? Sony Kapoor.
Yes, just on that point, I think this is an argument that is often used by people who support tax havens, that, there's a security issue. It may be that rich people in Colombia or Mexico face some problems, but that doesn't justify the existence of tax havens. The second is, if it is honest money, then by definition, it is not money that is needed to be secreted away in an opaque jurisdiction such as a tax haven. And I'd like to support the point that the previous speaker made. There is definitely a double standard wherein banking secrecy is targeted and jurisdictions such as Delaware and the City of London, which are equally complicit. It's a problem that afflicts both. So when I mentioned the policy recommendations that we are talking about, that needs to be applied across the board to banks and non-banks financial secrecy issues. The fact of the matter is that this is a collective action problem, not too different from tackling climate change. We estimated a few years back that for every additional euro of revenue that a government such as the Cayman Islands earned from being a tax haven, it led to a loss of about 25 euros of tax revenue to legitimate economies, both developed and developing. So one could actually think of a scenario where there's an international agreement that says, okay, you're a small island economy, you can't have, too much of a diverse economy. We are going to give you aid. But there's a collective clampdown against this tax haven. The additional tax revenues would be more than enough to compensate the countries that lose out,
Right.
that are remote islands in the middle of nowhere. But at the same time, tackle corruption, tackle crime, and tackle the rising problem of inequality.
Well, there is always a journalistic saying, isn't there? Sort of follow the money, and you'll come to where the crime begins.
Yes.
Mirat Zaki, there are trillions of dollars being secreted abroad in offshore tax havens. That works out, we reckon, on Inside Story, that works out at $280 billion in lost income tax revenues. And that is a huge black hole in the world economy. And I'm thinking sort of if all the money from Greece that wasn't paid in taxes was
That's
released
right.
from some of these banks, you wouldn't have a problem.
Exactly. So this is making the burden on us, the middle class, get even heavier, because we
But
have
it's not
to
just
pay
the middle
double
class,
tax
is it,
because the
Murat?
ultra-rich
It's
are
also the
evading.
working class. If you take that money out of the economy,
The
it means
working class.
taxes are going to be
Exactly.
high for the people right at the bottom as well.
For the bottom, maybe they're paying less taxes, but I'd say that the middle class is paying the heaviest burden because they earn reasonably well. But of course, the working class as well. So that the people who are in the real economy, who have honest salaries, are having to pay much more to compensate for the ultra-rich evasion, against which we can't do much, because if you're ultra-rich, you can buy yourself basically a license to evade. It's a luxury product nowadays. Evading, getting yourself an offshore trust is a luxury product. So if you have the money to buy it, you'll evade. If you are a medium-sized wealth, you have not really the means to evade, so you have to declare. So this is the point now. So there is an enormous parallel market, the market of the wealthiest tax evasion, that is a flourishing market, and it is the Anglo-Saxon financial industry that has captured most of it, and also the Asian centers like Hong Kong. So that if London and Washington and China don't participate in this collective talk about tax evasion, nothing can be done.
Exactly. And
These three powers have to
when we
participate.
talk about all the hidden money going abroad, it's been estimated in Britain that there would be a tuppence in the pound reduction in taxes right at the lowest end of the country. But Jean-Pierre Desarens, you believe that people have a right to tax havens, a human right. But what do you think about the money just sitting there in the vault in these very unequal times when people are very aware of the disparities in wealth and income around there, more aware than any time before? And don't you suspect that people are going to be gunning for you and gunning for these tax havens?
Well, what I see in these discussions, it's regretful. We just mix everything. The criminal money, the tax avoidance, the other taxation, and so on. Now, what I'd like to say is that that money doesn't just sit in a vault. That money is invested. That money, if earned honestly, is invested in the real economy, and it is creating jobs. It's just the cost factor of excessive taxation that has been reduced. Now, what do you say if you have money and a president of a country tells you that everything you earn above so much is going to be taxed by 75%? Now, we have to be careful, and we have to know who is the owner of the income generated by a creative individual who is creating added value. Who does that added value belong to? Does it belong to the state in which he's a resident or of which he holds a passport? Or does he own that added value and therefore is entitled to dispose of it? Now, I think we have a basic question, and we have to ask who is the owner of the funds generated by creative minds. And creative minds look at what happened with IT companies, what they have brought, and these people have become immensely rich because they are creative, because they create added value, and of course, these people will try to maximize their income and reduce the tax burden. Now, this is not a criminal activity.
And Sony Kapoor, we've worked out that less than 100,000 people own about $10 trillion worth of wealth, and nations even dwarfs the debts they owe. How much blame for this situation lies at the door, once again, of the banks because of so much uncertainty in the banking world and rules and tax complexities?
Well, what's really not brought out in the discussion is the very strong interlinkage between financial instability and the so-called tax havens. And I can give you an example. I used to trade derivatives, and it's been estimated that between a quarter to a third of all the derivatives trade, and we are talking here about $600 trillion every year, is in one way or the other linked to efforts to reduce the tax burden. So financial instability, and what happened after Lehman collapsed was it was a mid-sized bank, but it was because nobody else knew which other bank had Lehman-like exposure or which other bank was exposed to Lehman. that Lehman's collapse led to the complete collapse of the financial system. And this uncertainty, the same tools which are used, which is the opaque legal tools using tax havens that are used to avoid taxes, are also the tools that have been used to minimize capital requirements to avoid financial regulation. So to the extent that financial instability and tax avoidance and tax evasion go together, this is hugely dangerous. And I think that banks lie at the heart of the system, because no matter whether you're using trust or whether you're using secret bank accounts, it is the banks which eventually channel the money, even if it goes into investment.
As the question suggested, everything comes back to the banks, doesn't it? There is a saying, there are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. Until now, of course, unless, of course, you are a major corporation or you have very expert tax advisors. Thank you to our guests in Geneva, Jean-Pierre Dizerens, also in Geneva, Mirat Zaki, and in Brussels, Sony Kapoor. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching from me, Stephen Cole. Goodbye.
Pwede na? Okay. So, thank you, Al Jazeera, for that video. And I hope for those who are watching us right now, we give credit to Al Jazeera for that video. And our purpose for using that video is for you to understand why and what are the things that are happening right now that really needs attention for the tax authorities. No? So, there are many cases that alarming, especially in the financial and commercial transactions, that every tax authority should give so much attention in order to collect the proper amount of taxes. And this transfer pricing guidelines is one of the effective tool in order to avoid tax evasion and collect the proper taxes that belongs to the proper tax authorities. So, going back to our discussions, the revenue regulations 2-2013 or the transfer pricing guidelines, as discussed earlier, we adopt the arm's length principle as embodied in the OECD transfer pricing guidelines, and that arm's length principle is declared or provided in the Article 9 of the OECD Model Tax Convention. So, what is that arm's length principle adopted by the transfer pricing advocates? The arm's length principle requires the transactions with a related party to be made under comparable conditions and circumstances as a transaction with an independent party. So, it is founded on the premise that where market forces drive the terms and conditions agreed in an independent party transaction, the pricing of the transaction would reflect the true economic value of the contribution made by its entity in that transaction. So, what is the real transaction according to this arm's length principle? The real transaction is that of the independent party transactions. Why? Because only the economic forces in the market influence the price and not the control of one enterprise over the other that prevails in the related parties. No? So, that's the true transactions. Okay lang? Okay. So, essentially, sabi po dito sa transfer pricing guidelines, essentially, this means that if two associated enterprises, dalawa associated enterprises or related parties, derive profits at levels above or below, masyadong mataas o masyadong mababa yung profit, the comparable market level solely by reason of the spatial relationship between them. Bakit sobrang taas o sobrang baba? Because dyan na naman yung kulog. Ang reason is the spatial relationship between them. So, the profits will be deemed as non-arm's length. No? So, in such a case, tax authorities that adopt the arm's length principle can make the necessary adjustments to the taxable profits of the related parties in their jurisdiction so as to reflect the true value that would otherwise be derived on an arm's length basis. Okay, so ano po nangyari dito sa totoong buhay? No? Halimbawa, merong, just sa experience ko na lang, no, I won't give any other example. Yung naranasan ko na lang habang nag-o-audit ako, no, while I still working in the BAR. No. So, ano yung na-audit ko? It's an outsourcing company. And then, along the way, when I review, I require them to submit a transfer pricing analysis report because there are related parties. No? So, ang una kong tiningnan, kung anong klaseng transfer pricing method yung ginagamit nila. At ang ginamit nila is the cost plus method. Why? Kasi outsourcing nga sila, and then ang katwiran nila, reimbursement of expenses lang po dito sa Pilipinas dahil wala namang sales na nangyayari dito kung hindi puro services lang. Why? Because they are just providing service to their parent company situated in US. No? So, anong ginawa ko? Since nakita ko na highly integrated po yung kanilang operations, so I recommended them to use the profit split method instead of using the cost plus method. No? And then their accountants, no, nagsabi sa akin or hindi siya pumayag, no, against that treatment na dapat daw talaga sa kanila cost plus lang, not the profit split. So when I try to analyze the transfer pricing analysis report that they submitted to me, nakita ko pa may mga intangibles na ginagamit yung company as provided by the other related parties in India. And what are those? Those are the softwares, no? So more so na nag-complicate na yung matters at hindi na rin sila qualified dun sa profit split, doon na sila sa transactional net margin method, no? So in that case, nag-react na naman ulit yung kanilang accountant and then their lawyers, no? At gumawa na ako ng adjustment. I did my own adjustment dun sa case na yun, no? And then ano yung contention nila na there is double taxation, no? So I will tell you now that double taxation is not per se talagang ina-avoid ng bawat bansa. Sometimes, double taxation is being adopted. Bakit? Kasi intentional yung pag-declare ng income na dapat dito sa ating bansa at dineclare nila na income doon sa ibang bansa. Because according to them, if pag in-adjust ko yung income dito sa Pilipinas, nabayaran na yung income na yan doon sa ibang bansa. Declared na yan doon. Kasi bakit? Pagka dinagdagan ko yung income dito, bawas yan doon sa income sa ibang bansa. Which is, ang sabi nila, na-file na doon yung return and then nabayaran na. That will be tantamount to double taxation. No? So, double taxation as much as possible is avoided, but in some cases, they are allowed. Why? Especially dito sa case na sinasabi ko na intentional po talaga on the part of the company na hindi niya dineclare yung income dito sa Pilipinas kasi nagtitipid siya ng tax, dineclare niya doon sa ibang bansa na mababa yun lang yung tax. No? So, ang nangyayari doon, nag-resort sila ng MAP or the Mutual Agreement Procedure na sa dispute resolution, no? Para daw naman mabawasan yung assessment dito sa Pilipinas. Now, in that case, that is also allowable. Okay, so ano po yung napanood natin doon sa Al Jazeera na movie? Yun yung mga iba-ibang scheme na ginagawa ng mga ultra-rich in order to minimize or avoid the payment of taxes. Why? Because they can afford to hire tax experts or tax consultants or lawyers na makakatipid po sila ng pagbabayad ng tax. Ang pinaka-striking lang doon sa naririnig ko sa economist na sometimes the payment of taxes is becoming optional. Because if you are ultra-rich and you can afford to buy services of the experts, then payment of taxes is just is already optional because you can opt not to pay your taxes. No? May mga gagawin ka na pamamaraan na hindi ka makabayad ng taxes. Yun na nga yung unreporting of income at saka over-declaration of expenses. Ano ang effect noon? Both. No? Mawawala yung payment of taxes. Okay. So what are the guidance on the application of the arm's length principle? May nanonood pa sa atin? Ilan sa YouTube? Sa ano? Sa Facebook? 5. Okay. So, pero tapusin natin to hanggang 5 o'clock, ha? Okay. So, what are the guidance on the application of the arm's length principle? The application of the arm's length principle would first and foremost involve the identification of the comparable situation. So, pagka in-apply mo yung arm's length principle, ano yung involved dito? No? The identification of comparable situations. Yung comparables na sinasabi natin. Why? Because the heart of transfer pricing is comparability. And when we say comparability, ano gagawin mo dito? I-compare mo yung independent transactions, no? Financial and commercial transactions, with that of the related party transactions para makita mo kung tama ba ang pricing ng related party transactions. Kasi sa independent party, carried na yun eh. Ang sabi ng regulations, tama na eh. Yun yung tama eh, ang independent party. So, ang titingnan na lang natin kung nag-conform ba itong related parties with the pricing ng independent parties. No? Anong tawag dyan? Comparability analysis. No? So, comparability analysis is the heart of transfer pricing. Why? Kasi di ba sabi natin, ang transfer pricing adopted the arm's length principle. At ano ba yung arm's length principle? Compares the financial and commercial transactions of the related party with that of the independent party. So, pag sinabi natin compares, gagawa tayo ng comparability analysis para makapag-compare tayo. So, comparability analysis is the heart of transfer pricing. Bakit? Yan ang pinaka-importante sa transfer pricing. Why? Kasi wala tayong transfer pricing kung hindi tayo magko-compare, no? Although in some cases, sa Europe, may mga cases doon na hindi niya in-apply yung transfer pricing methods because of the uniqueness of the transactions, the peculiarity of the industries, na hindi niya in-apply yung transfer pricing methods, and yet kineri siya ng korte, panalo pa rin yung tax authorities na inalaw pa rin na there is no comparables. Why? Because of the uniqueness of the industry. No? So, walang comparables. Walang transfer pricing method na ginamit, pero there is a transfer pricing issue. No? So, precedent po na case yun, international case in transfer pricing. So, it entails an analysis of the similarities and differences in the conditions and characteristics that are found in the associated enterprises. So, since magko-compare tayo, so titingnan natin, i-analyze natin, ano ba yung mga similarities, ano ba yung mga differences ng related party at ng independent party. No? So, once the impact of these similarities or differences have on the transfer price, na determine na po natin, so the arm's length price or margin or range can then be established using an appropriate transfer pricing method. No? So, mamaya pag-aralan natin yung transfer pricing methods, ano ba yung mga yon, no? At paano siya ginagawa. So, in the application of the arm's length principle, the following three-step approach discussed in detail in section 6, 7, and 8 of these regulations may be observed. So, ano tong mga steps? Step 1, conduct a comparability analysis. So, you really have to compare. At ano yung i-compare mo dito sa step 1? the independent party transactions and the related party transactions. Step 2, identify the tested party and the appropriate transfer pricing method. So, sino ba yung tested party mo at ano ba yung dapat na gamitin niya na transfer pricing method when it compares, no, the transactions. And then step 3, determine the arm's length results. Ano yung arm's length results? Yun yung tama na pricing, no? Yun yung pricing ng independent party. This step should be applied in line with the K objective on transfer pricing analysis to present a logical and persuasive basis to demonstrate that transfer prices set before associated enterprises conform to the arm's length principle. So ano talaga ang tinitingnan dito? Yung conformity to the arm's length principle. Okay. So sabi na natin we have to compare. So we have to do the comparability analysis, no? And what are the concept of comparability? So the arm's length principle is based on a comparison of the prices or margins adopted or obtained by related parties with those adopted or obtained by independent parties engaged in similar transactions, no? For such price or margin comparison to be meaningful, all economically relevant characteristics of the situations being compared should be sufficiently similar so that none of the differences. So pag nag-compare na kayo, ito po yung basyan natin o ito yung titingnan natin. Dapat none of the differences between the situations being compared can materially affect the price or margin being compared. So dapat hindi siya materially affected by the differences to make them comparable, no? The related party and the independent party. Number 2, reasonably accurate adjustment can be made to eliminate the effect of any such differences. So kung meron mang differences, dapat ma-adjust yan para magiging similar sila, no? Okay. So none of the differences, if any, between the situations being compared can materially affect the price or margin being compared. So, paano po natin i-apply to at paano natin i-analyze? No? So, magbigay tayo ng example, no? So, makikita ba nila pag nagsulat ako dito? Okay. Mahaba naman to ng mic, di ba? Sige. Okay. So sabi kasi dito, pag nag-compare na tayo ng dalawang product, kailangan hindi siya materially affected by the price or margin being compared, no? So, ito yung related party. Okay. So, related party yan. Ito yung sabi natin, si A, B, C, related party yan. So, yun yung pricing niya. So, dapat, pag gumawa tayo ng transfer pricing analysis, meron tayong independent party kung saan natin i-compare itong pricing ni related parties, no? So, ito independent parties. And when we compare, dapat pareho sila. So, since ang pinag-usapan dito is shoes, dapat shoes din itong ating independent party, no? So, si A, B, and C. So, ito naman independent party, si X, Y, and then si Z, no? So, si X is the manufacturer. Okay. So, si Y naman is the distributor. And then si ito yung independent party is the reseller, no? Retailer. Okay. So, sabi natin, i-compare mo yung price or margin nilang dalawa. So, si X is the manufacturer, si A is also a manufacturer, no? We consider na pareho yung product nila na shoes. Ito yung shoes. Pareho yung kanilang ginagawa, no? So si A sa related party na transaction, ang presyo niya sa sapatos na ginawa niya is 300, no? Tingnan natin. Si X naman, same na sapatos na manufacture ni A, ang presyo niya is only 200, no? So dito, sa sinasabi dito sa sample natin, na dapat pag nag-compare na tayo, kung may difference man, the differences cannot materially affect the price or margin being compared, or pwede tayong gumawa ng adjustment to eliminate the effect of such differences. So in this case, ano i-compare natin? I-compare natin yung price, which is the 200 at saka yung 300, no? So, ang sabi dito, dapat walang difference na masyadong malaki, materially affect the price, at saka kung meron man, pwede siyang i-adjust. Okay. So, i-analyze natin, bakit si manufacturer 200 lang, bakit si A 300? Sino ba yung may tama? Di ba? Sabi natin na ang may tamang price, itong independent party. At si related party, yan ang hindi tama na price, no? So, along the way, titingnan natin, ano ba yung diferensya? Bakit 200 lang, siya 300, no? So, anong nangyari based on our analysis? Nag-mark up siya ng mas malaki, ng 100, ipinasa niya dito kay B, no? So, yun yung sinasabi natin. Halimbawa, through our analysis, pwede ba nating i-adjust yung price? Hindi natin pwedeng i-adjust yung price because based on our analysis, wala tayong factor, basta lang siya. Ang reason is dinagdagan lang niya yung kanyang, binawasan niya yung kanyang gross profit. Kasi kung dito, mas mataas yung gross profit mo kasi 200 lang yung cost. So definitely, kung ibenta mo yan ng 500, 300 ang gross profit. Dito, 200 lang. So mas malaki ang gross profit nitong independent party. No? So dito, maliit lang kasi control, nagdagdag siya or ginawa niya na malaki yung kanyang price, no, na cost. Okay? So nakikita ako? Ha? Ang Facebook? Bakit? Sa? Sige. Pero yung yung YouTube, ilan yung nanonood?
7 pa rin.
Okay. Sige. So, yun po yung ating explanation na. Okay. So, dapat none of the differences, if any, between the situation being compared materially affect the price or margin. So, sa example ko dito, meron talagang 100 na material na effect, no? So, anong gagawin natin? Magkakaroon tayo ng adjustment. Anong i-adjust natin? Siyempre, si manufacturer na related party. Paano natin siya i-adjust? Adjust natin yung 100, no? So, the true price is only 200. So, anong gagawin dyan? Tanggalin mo yung 100, so 200 na lang para mas malaki yung kanyang gross profit. No? Ganyan pag gumawa po tayo ng analysis at saka ng adjustment. So, lalaki ngayon ang gross profit ni related party. Pareho na sila ng gross profit ni independent party. Kasi in-add back natin, ibinawas natin yung 100 na overpricing ni independent party, ni related party, no, na manufacturer. Patayin mo na nga to, malamig na. Okay. So, since sabi natin sa arm's length principle, related parties, magkakaroon tayo ng comparability. So, ano yung i-compare natin? And what are the factors that affect comparability analysis, no? So, number one na dapat natin i-compare, the characteristic of goods, services, or intangible properties. So, in our example, Ang goods na example natin is the shoes. So, pareho ba sila ng characteristic? No? Kasi kung hindi sila comparable. Hindi ka pwede mag-compare. No? So, dapat pag naghanap ka ng comparable mo, pareho sila ng product or ng services. Or, kung intangible properties man yan, pareho yung i-compare mo. Do not compare, no? Yung hindi pareho na ang characteristics o magkaiba yung nature ng properties nila. You cannot compare them. Why? Kasi magkaiba talaga ng presyo kasi by nature, iba eh. Iba sila eh, magkaiba sila. So, naturally, it will command a different price. Okay. So, the specific characteristics of goods, services, or intangible properties play a significant part in determining their values, no, in the open market. So, for instance, a product with better quality and more features would ceteris paribus fits a higher selling price. Natural. Kasi mas maganda yung quality, mas mahal ang product. Such product or service differentiation affects the price or value of the product or services. So in that case, kung yung isa, maganda ang quality, kaya siya mahal, so hindi mo siya pwedeng i-compare doon sa low quality na product, kaya mura lang yung price. No? So they are not comparable. Pag nag-compare ka sa transfer pricing, maghanap ka talaga ng comparable. No? So pareho sila para meron kang point of comparison. No? So the nature and features of the goods, intangible properties, or services transacted between related parties and those between independent parties must be examined carefully. No? So ano yun? Nature and features. Why? Kasi it affects the price of the good, depende sa ginamit mong transfer pricing methods. No? So the similarities and differences which would influence the value of the goods, services, or intangible properties should be identified. Kaya nga, nagkakaroon ka ng analysis eh. Kaya kung ano yung mga similarities and differences, i-identify mo yan. Okay. So, characteristics to be examined include but are not limited to the following. So, ano yung mga characteristics na dapat nating suriin o i-examine? No? In the case of transfer of goods, the physical features, the quality and reliability, the availability and volume of supply of the goods. So ito yung mga titingnan natin when we compare, no, the characteristics. No? Ano yun? Physical features. Siyempre, pag maganda yung physical features niya, may added value yun sa product. No? Kaya mayroong price yan. No? May price consideration yan pagka maganda yung physical features. No? I-compare mo yung maganda kaysa sa pangit. No? So sa pangit, walang bibili. Sa maganda, marami. So, ibig sabihin, may attribute siya, may weight yung pagiging maganda niya na physical features. No? So, the quality and reliability and the availability and volume of supply of the goods. So, ano yung quality and reliability? Maganda yung klase ng product at saka reliable, maaasahan, hindi nasisira. And the availability and volume of supply of the goods. No? Availability, pag kailangan mo, nandyan may mapagkuhanan ka. And also the volume of supply of the goods. Nandyan palagi may available na supplies. No? So in the case of provision of services, the nature and extent of the services. No? Pag services naman, ang compare mo, kasi sometimes yung services ang binebenta mo sa mga kliyente. So papaano mo ngayon tingnan ang characteristics ng services mo, no? So, the nature and extent of the services. Titingnan po natin yan. In the case of intangible property, the form of transaction. Ano bang klaseng transaction ito? The type of intangible, the duration and degree of protection, and the anticipated benefits from the use of the property, no? Kasi ang pinag-usapan dito intangible. Ano ba itong intangible? Ito yung mga bagay-bagay na wala po silang physical attributes, no? Pero they are value drivers. No? So, form of transaction, the types of intangibles, no? The duration and degree of protection. Ano yung mga duration and degree of protection? Kasi pag nakapatent yan at nakaregister yan sa IPO, sa Intellectual Property Office natin, protected lang po yung patent for 20 years. After 20 years, it will become of patent and it will become a public domain and anybody can use already your patent, no? So, wala nang protection yung batas after 20 years sa patent. It will become off patent, no? And it will be available to the public kung gusto nilang gamitin. Okay, so anticipated benefits from the use of the property, no? Ano ba yung anticipated benefits from the use of the property na intangibles, no? Yun yung you license the intangible. Bigyan mo siya ng kikita siya kasi pinapalicense to use mo sa ibang company, no? Kung halimbawa mga softwares yan. Okay. Similarities in the actual characteristics of the product. So ano yung similarities ng actual characteristics of the product? Intangible or service. Most critical when one needs to compare prices of related party transaction against independent ones, no? Such as when the comparable uncontrolled pricing method is adopted as the transfer pricing method. Ano yung comparable uncontrolled price? We compare the price, no? So when we compare the price, the characteristic of the product, the service, most critical, no? Kasi when we compare the price, then we really need to establish the prices. No? Pakiabot mo yung tubig ko. Ayan. Ayan. Thank you. Ano na eh. Tuyo na yung lalamunan. Okay. So tuloy tayo hanggang 5 o'clock po tayo. Hindi natin ito matapos kasi ano tong transfer pricing guidelines na ito mahaba-haba. So tapusin po natin ito, live streaming tayo ulit next week. No? Okay. So Monday hindi pwede kasi may Zoom po tayo ng tax update natin ang 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock sa Monday. And then Tuesday meron naman tayong marami na bang nag-register doon sa free bookkeeping natin for the 28 and 29 and 30?
Nasa 150 plus na.
So tuloy tayo. So hindi tayo pwede mag-live streaming ng Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So ulit tayo ng Thursday and Friday next week, no? Para tapusin. Actually, wala itong katapusan kasi palagi itong updates because after the transfer pricing guidelines, doon naman tayo sa revenue audit memorandum guidelines and then doon naman tayo sa mga bago pa na mga issues sa transfer pricing, no? Hanggang sa ituro ko rin sa inyo yung transfer pricing analysis, how to make the transfer pricing analysis report and also the documentation. Although, itong transfer pricing guidelines, kompleto na to, mag-a-updates na lang tayo. No? Okay. So, on the other hand, comparisons of profit margins. No? So, sa CAP, comparable uncontrolled price method, we compare the price. No? Doon naman sa profit margins, ano naman yung kino-compare natin doon? The profit margins. No? So, it is less sensitive to the features and characteristics of the product or services in question. So, sa resale price method at sa cost plus method, hindi siya sensitive sa features or characteristics, no? Kasi bakit? Ano ba yung kino-compare doon sa resale price at saka sa cost plus method? The gross profit margin. No? So as the margins generally correlate more significantly with the functions performed, risk, bonds, and assets used by the entity. So ang profit or margin, sino yung nag-influence sa kanya? The functions, assets, and risk. No? Okay. So, how do you make an analysis of the functions, assets, and risks? Dati kanina, ang una, yung characteristic and nature of goods and services, whether tangible or intangible. And then ito na po yung pangalawa, the analysis of functions, risks, and assets. Okay. So, economic theory purports that the level of return derived by an entity should be directly correlated to the functions performed, the assets used, and risk assumed. No? So, ano daw yung tinitingnan? The functions performed, the assets used, and the risk assumed. So, example, entity selling a product with warranty should earn a higher return compared to another entity selling the same product without the provision of warranty. So, na-identify mo na kaagad bakit sila diferensya, no? Kasi yung entities selling the product with warranty, dapat mas mataas yung return niya kasi meron pa siyang warranty na iso-shoulder pagka may mga defective goods, no? Compared to another entity selling the same product without the provision of warranty. So yung may provision ng warranty at saka walang provision ng warranty. So, dapat mas malaki yung sa may warranty provisions compared doon sa wala. No? Okay. So, the difference in margin is due to the additional function performed and risk borne by the first entity. So, likewise, a product with a reputable branding is expected to fetch a higher return compared to that of a similar product without the branding due to the additional asset, in this case, trademark employed in enhancing the value of the product. Okay. So, saan daw nagkakaroon ng difference sa margin? No? So, there is difference in margin. Ang dahilan, yung functions performed and the risk borne by the first entity. So, sa independent market, if the entity have so much risk, no, na naka-assign sa kanya, so dapat binabayaran din siya doon sa risk na yan. No? Kasi kung hindi siya compensated, then the transaction is not arm's length. Okay. So, a crucial step in comparability analysis must entail a comparison of the economically significant functions performed, the risk assumed, the assets employed by the related party, with those by the independent party, which has been selected as the party against which the associated enterprise or margin or transactions are to be benchmarked. No? So, kailangan ang comparison talaga, economically significant functions performed, no? Na ginagawa niya. Ano ba talaga yung functions niya? What are the example of functions? Ito yung manufacturing, ito yung distribution, warehousing, delivery. So, yun po yung example ng functions, no? Ano naman tong mga risk assumed, no? There are so many kind of risk, no? Ano bang klaseng risk yung in-assume niya? And then, kung in-assume naman niyo yung risk, capable ba siya to pay for that risk if the risk happen? No? Okay. Ano naman tong assets employed by the related party with those by the independent party? Because we have asset-intensive companies, no? So magtataka ka ngayon, bakit asset-intensive companies ito? Wala siyang asset. Bakit? Lahat ng assets niya nasa parent company, na nakapangalan sa parent company. Pero, ang gumagamit the related parties. So magtataka ka ngayon. Dahil siya talaga ang ganyan ang nature ng business, bakit wala sa kanya yung mga equipments, no? Or the assets used in the manufacture ng product. No? So magtataka ka ngayon. Okay. So ano yung gagawin doon? Functional analysis. No? Ang daming lamok, patayin mo nga. Masakit. No, nangangagat. Okay. So this is typically known as conducting a functional analysis. So in my experience, no, nagiging trainer ako on the risk management, no. And what are the risks na dapat i-manage or i-adapt ng business, no? So ito yung mga risk sa business. Halimbawa, highly susceptible sa nakaw yung inyong mga inventory. So ito yung risk na mawawala yung mga inventories mo. And then ano pa? Kung halimbawa inventory oriented ka naman, alam mo, so, kung inventory-oriented ka naman, yung risk na magiging obsolete ang inventory mo, no? Or halimbawa naman yung supplies ng goods mo ay ini-import mo at ang supplier mo abroad, yung the risk na mawalan ka ng supplier o out of stock yung mga goods mo, no? So, those are all the risk example ng risk na i-absorb ng company, no? So the functions that should be compared include but are not limited to design, research and development, manufacturing, distribution, sales, marketing, logistics, advertising, financing. Depende po 'yan sa nature ng company, no? So ano yung mga sample ng mga functions niya? Ito yung mga sinasabi ko. So this manufacturing is a function, no? Kasi ito yung ginagawa niya or economic activity niya na ginagawa niya para doon sa business, no? Okay. So question muna bago tayo to. Okay.
Sino po ang nagbibigay ng SRP? Manufacturer or distributor?
Ang nagbibigay ng
SRP daw.
Suggested retail price, no? Ang nagbibigay, usually po ang nagbibigay niyan ang manufacturer, no? Sila po ang nagbibigay, no? Usually. At saka sa halimbawa yung related parties, manggagaling lahat 'yan sa parent company. Pero pagdating naman sa independent party, ang suggested retail price, ganun din sa manufacturer din siya nanggagaling, pero suggested lang 'yon. Depende na 'yon doon sa retailer, especially kung tataasan niya yung markup or hindi, no? Kasi ang sabi nga natin, the true price is that of the independent enterprise kasi wala siyang element of control. At ano lang yung nag-i-influence sa kanya? Sa market price niya, it's the market, the law of supply and demand, no? So kung malaki, taasan niya yung presyo niya, pwede kasi ang supply limited at saka exclusive lang sila sa ganyang product, walang substitute. So pwede niyang taasan. Pero kung tinaasan niya, pero merong substitute na products, wala nang bibili sa kanya. So anong gagawin niya? Lower the price. Yun yung sabi natin na yun ang totoong price. Kasi walang element of control, ang nag-i-influence lang sa kanya yung law of supply and demand in the market. So, sino yung magbibigay ng SRP? Usually, the manufacturer. Okay, wala na? So, appraisal of risk. So, paano ina-appraise yung risk? Why? Kasi in the appraisal of risk, alamin mo na kung magkano yung gastos mo or yung exposure mo pag nangyari itong risk. Kasi pag hindi mo in-appraise yung risk, when the risk come, paano mo siya babayaran? Paano mo siya i-assume? Especially sa warranties, no? Magwawarrant ka ngayon sa defective na goods mo, ayusin mo. So, kung hindi mo alam, hindi mo siya i-appraise yung risk, hindi mo alam ngayon, pag nandiyan na ang risk, kung kikita ka pa ba o hindi. Remember that in transfer pricing, what we are talking here is an economic entity. And that economic entity, the purpose is business, no? Kasi kung hindi business ang purpose mo, iba yung classification mo, non-stock, non-profit organization ka. But in transfer pricing, we are talking about an economic entity, the business entity, no? And when we say you are doing business, you are doing business for profit. The ultimate end in making or engaging into a business is for profit. Kasi kalokohan lang yan na losing na yung company, business ka pa rin ng business kahit net loss ka. No? No? So, kalokohan yan in a sense na nagtatapon ka ng pera at saka ng effort na ang business economic entity ng isang nagnenegosyo, ang purpose talaga is profit. So, hindi ka na nagpa-profit, bakit ka pa rin nagnenegosyo? Okay? So, appraisal ng risk is important in determining the arm's length prices or margins. Kasi, pag risky yung isang business venture, dapat mas mahal yan compared doon sa business na walang risk. No? So, the possible risks assumed that should be considered in the functional analysis include market risk. No? Ano yung market risk? Yung akyat baba yung presyo, no? Or yung share ng isang product sa market, kung kilala na ba siya o hindi pa. And then the risk of change in cost. Ano ba yung risk of change in cost? No? Yung availability ng supplier ng product. No? Kasi kung walang available na supply, tataas yung cost mo. Kasi mahal mo siya mabibili. Pero kung maraming supply sa market, mas mababa yung cost mo kasi maraming supply, kahit na may demand siya, makakabili ka pa rin at a lower price, no? Price or stock, no? Yung price or the stock, no? Magkasama talaga 'yan. Kasi pag maraming stocks, mababa yung price. Pag kakaunti lang yung stocks, tataas yung price, no? Risk relating to the success or failure of the research and development, because there are some research and development that are entered into or nagiging project po ng company to develop a new, halimbawa na natin is software or a new product, no? But it will not guarantee success, no? Kaya yung research and development may success din and failure. No? So may risk na loss, no? Di ba? Hindi mo na successfully develop yung product. So, what happened to your cost ng research and development? No? So, mapupunta lahat yun sa wala. No? Financial risk, such as changes in the foreign exchange and interest rates, credit risk, and others. Yan yung mga tinatawag natin na financial risk, no? Changes ng foreign exchange, if you are using dollars para dun sa import-export business mo, no? So, pag nagbago yung exchange rate, babago ka rin, mag-recognize ka ng either gain or loss, no? How about interest rates, no? Meron akong good news, no, na nasagap dun sa isang client. Sa ibang bansa, especially sa Singapore, meron silang branch office doon. The other countries are offering very, very low interest rates dun sa mga, siyempre, may pandemic. So, they wanted to help these companies. No? So, ang interest rates na ino-offer nila is very, very low. And then, may commitment po yung government not to increase the rate of interest for the next 10 years. No? So for the next 10 years, halimbawa, nangutang ka ngayon, the interest per annum is 2%. Pero mas lower pa nga yung sinabi sa akin, something like 1.9% lang per annum. So, napakababa. So, talagang mangungutang ka. After that, for 10 years, bayaran mo yon at that lower interest. Kasi, ang sabi ng gobyerno, no increase in interest for the next 10 years. No? So, malaking tulong po sa mga nagsuffer na company because of the pandemic. Okay. So in practice, one cannot be expected to compare all functions, risks, and assets employed. Siyempre, in practice, hindi mo talaga yan ma-compare. Why? Kasi sa dami niyan, no? So hindi mo talaga, it's impossible. Hence, it must be emphasized that only functions, risks, and assets that are economically significant in determining the value of transactions or margins of entities should be identified and compared. Yun lang yung mga substantial or material talaga ang effect doon sa transactions. Yun yung ating i-compare, no? Kasi sa dami niyan, yung iba very minimal lang yung effect. So doon na tayo sa material talaga. Okay. Okay.
Bakit po sa black market mataas ang exchange rate compare sa bank?
Sa black market po, hindi kasi regulated, no? Ang bank is regulated. So, ang black market, mataas talaga yan kasi it goes kung ano lang yung actual na demand doon ng seller and the buyer. Pero sa bank, at ang recommended po sa atin is through the bank. Why? Kasi yung banks natin, regulated po kasi siya. Yung sa black market, parang ano yan underground economy, no? So walang ano diyan, at saka wala kang kasiguraduhan diyan, no? Kasi sabi nga natin, since walang batas diyan, it is not regulated, high risk. Kaya mataas diyan because high risk, no? High risk, minsan hindi mo ka alam kung sino yung ka-transaction mo. Minsan hindi mo alam, naloko ka na pala, no? So high risk, hindi ka protected. Samantalang sa legal na regulated, protected ka, no? So yun. Wala na? Okay. So commercial and economic circumstances, no? So prices may vary across different markets, even for transactions involving the same property or services. Yes naman, no? This is real, no? Ito yung taas sa totoong buhay. Yung mga property or services, iba-iba talaga yung presyo sa market. So in order to make meaningful comparison of prices or margins between entities or transactions, the markets and economic conditions in which the entities operate or where the transactions are undertaken should be comparable. Kaya nga ito na po yung pangatlo natin na factor sa comparability analysis, the commercial and economic circumstances or conditions. Because when you compare, dapat titingnan mo na pareho yung economic circumstances ng dalawang produkto. Halimbawa, yung isang produkto, binenta siya during the lean months. So, mababa talaga kasi or during pandemic, no? So, mababa talaga kasi nag-down yung demand. Pero yung isang product naman, halimbawa, binenta siya during the peak season, December. So, mahal po siya talaga kasi ang laki ng demand pagka December, no? Okay. The economic circumstances that may be relevant in determining market comparability include the availability of substitute goods or services. Ano yung availability of substitute goods and services? Ito yung nandyan sa shelf, halimbawa yung product mo. But doon sa shelf na yan, pag tumaas ka ng presyo, ang daming product doon na pareho na din ng product mo na pwedeng pagpilian. So pag tumaas ka ng presyo at sobrang mahal, anong gagawin ng customer? Maghanap siya doon sa shelf na katabi mo ng same product substitutes, hindi niya bibilhin yung product mo kasi sobrang mahal. Doon siya sa product na same lang din sa product mo pero mas mura. Okay? Okay. Okay, so ano pa yung mga relevant daw in determining market comparability, no? So ito yung availability of substitute goods or services, the geographic location. Ano yung geographic location? The place kung saan kayo nagbebenta. So halimbawa, dito sa Asia, so dito ka maghanap ng comparables, dito ka mag-compare. No? Halimbawa sa Pilipinas, so dito ka mag-compare ng mga independent entities, no? The market size, so dapat pareho yung market size mo. Extent of competition in the market, no? Ano yung extent of competition in the market? Yung product mo ba competitive? Makakapag-compete ba siya sa market? Because napakaraming product na kagaya ng product mo, no? So, you have to consider also the consumer purchasing power, no? So, economic conditions pa rin yan. So, ano tong mga consumer purchasing power? Lalo na ngayon, no? Kasi down lahat dahil sa pandemic. Walang purchasing capacity yung mga tao. So, nagtitiis lang. Oh? The level of the market at which the enterprises operate. Ano ba siya? Wholesaler, retailer, or distributor ba siya? Or manufacturer, no? So, yun yung level ng market na nandiyan dyan, nagninegosyo yung entity, no? Tatayo ako kasi masakit na yung tuhod ko. Okay. And then next, the government policies and regulations such as price controls, national insurance and others may have an impact on prices and margins. May nanonood pa ba sa atin? Ilan?
7 po tsaka po 5.
Sa Facebook, no? Kasi uwian na eh. Uwian na. So yung iba naman kung work at home, may iba na silang trabaho, no? So pero tuloy lang tayo basta hanggang 5 o'clock tayo, no? So the effects of this regulation should also be examined as part of the examination for comparability of the market and economic conditions. Anong oras na? 4:30. 34. So 20 minutes more, no? So ka-YouTubers 20 minutes more. 25 minutes more. Hindi 34? Oh, so tama. 25 minutes pa. Okay. Mga kalahating oras. Okay. So business strategies, ito po yung pinaka fourth natin na comparability factors, no? So business strategies daw should also be examined in determining comparability for transfer pricing purposes. Bakit? Ano ba itong tinatawag na business strategies? Because it would take into account many aspects of an enterprise, no? Such as innovation, new product development, degree of diversification, risk aversion, assessment of political changes, other factors bearing upon the daily conduct of the business. So, bakit nagkakaroon ng business strategies ang isang entity? No? Anong purpose? Siguro, para magkaroon siya ng malaking sales or share in the market. Kaya gumagawa siya ng strategies in order to improve yung sales ng company niya or the commercial and financial transaction ng business. In short, palakihin yung business. Kaya nagkakaroon siya ng mga strategies. No? Okay. So the entity may embark on business strategies or temporarily charging a lower price for its product compared to similar products in the market, or incurring higher expenses in the short run, hence resulting in lower profit levels. Dahil gumagawa po siya ng strategies, pwedeng taasan niya, pwedeng babaan yung kanyang presyo. Bakit? Siguro ibenta niya at a loss kasi para maraming bibili at makilala yung kanyang business dahil bago lang sa market, magkaroon siya ng market share, no? So kaya binabaan niya yung presyo, no? So pwede rin magkakaroon siya ng higher na expenses, no? Kung i-promote niya yung kanyang product, no? So depende na yun sa strategy na i-adapt ng company, no? But a word of caution, ano po yung sabi ng tax authorities dito sa business strategies, no? Halimbawa, yung business strategy mo such that lower ka ng price. So anong ibig sabihin doon? Lower also your profit. O minsan, you are selling at a loss, so wala kang profit. Anong word of caution dito ng tax authorities? Dapat yung business strategy mo is only temporary, no? Kasi how can you afford na tuloy-tuloy ibenta mo yung product mo at a loss, no? So hindi na siya economically sound yung ginagawa, no? Hindi na yan business strategies, no? Such strategies are commonly used for market penetration and market share expansion or defense, no? So, key issue with respect to business strategies, temporarily reduce profits in anticipation of higher long-term profit is whether the adoption and outcome of such strategies produce an arm's length result. So, kahit nasabihin mo na po na strategies yan, ang sagutin mo. Okay. So such strategies, Sir Eugene, bigay mo kay Sir Eugene. Such strategies are commonly used for market penetration and market share expansion or defense, no? So may purpose po yung strategies. Kasi kung walang purpose yan at forever inadapt lang ng company, hindi po siya katanggap-tanggap, no? Pagka nagkaroon ng transfer pricing audit, magkakaroon po ng adjustment, no? So the key issue with respect to business strategies that temporarily reduce profits in anticipation of higher long-term profit is whether the adoption and outcome ng strategy is arm's length. Ano po ang sabi natin about arm's length kanina? It should be na comparable siya sa independent party transaction, kaya siya arm's length, no? Kasi pag hindi siya arm's length, then hindi siya comparable sa independent party, magkakaroon ng adjustment. Okay. Okay. Sige.
Irish na rin po.
Okay.
Bakit po nung time ng ECQ po, mataas ang exchange rate compare na yung bumaba siya? Ano po ang sa tingin niyo, bakit bumaba kung saan MECQ na? Any idea lang po?
May mga economic reasons po yan, no? So mataas siya during the pandemic ang exchange rate, no? And then bumaba na ngayon, no? So pag mataas ang exchange rate, ano ba yan, favorable ba sa atin o hindi, no? Sa economics kasi posible siya na favorable kasi pag ikaw yung may dollars at i-exchange mo yung dollars mo, gain ka. Pero kung halimbawa nag-e-export ka, ikaw yung bibili ng dollars, then at a loss ka, no? So depende po kasi ang effect niyan depende po yan sa sitwasyon at depende din po sa company. That can be beneficial to one and then pwede rin namang disadvantage sa iba, no? So yung reason dictated po yan sa economic force po ng hindi na yung bansa natin economic forces na po yung may hawak diyan, no? So alam niyo naman ang nangyayari ngayon, economic to, no? This is economics. At ano ba yung mga factors that affects that? Kasama na rin sa economics yung the law of supply and demand, no? Kaya during the time of the pandemic medyo tumaas kasi parang konti lang yung doon, di ba? Parang hinold or nagka-carb yung ating exchange, no? So ngayon naman bumaba, no? So siguro help na rin yan ng ating mga lawmakers para doon naman makabawi yung mga na sasuffer po sa pandemic, no? So those things are masabi na natin sa international market natin na regulated din po ng mga agencies natin, especially sa atin sa pagdating sa pera, the World Bank at the IMF, no? Okay. May question pa? Okay. So, claim that such strategies have been adopted ought to be demonstrated with evidence that an independent party would have been prepared to sacrifice profitability for a similar period under similar economic circumstances and competitive conditions so that a higher long-term profit can be realized. May ina-anticipate ka na lalaki yung profit mo, kaya mo ginawa itong strategies na to. Kasi kung wala, then it is not arm's length, no? Okay. So, identification of the tested party and the appropriate transfer pricing method. So, dito na po tayo sa methods. Anong oras na ba? 4:43. So, hindi natin ano yung method talaga. Kasi there are 5 transfer pricing methods. So, next week na po natin yung transfer pricing methods. But, anyway, tuloy po natin itong tested parties, no? So, identification of the tested party and the appropriate transfer pricing method. Sino po itong tested party? Ito po yung entity to which a transfer pricing method can be most reliably applied to and from which the most reliable comparables can be found, no? Ito yung tested party. Ito yung ginagawa na entity na gagawa natin ng analysis, no? So, For an entity to become a tested party, anong sabi po ng BIR? Sufficient and verifiable information on such entity. Why? Kasi hindi mo siya magawa na tested party, hindi mo siya magawa ng comparability analysis, ng transfer pricing analysis, kung wala siyang sufficient and verifiable information. No? Kasi information documentation is very, very important in the making of transfer pricing analysis. No? So, pag sinabi mo sufficient, sapat, enough, no? Enough yung information na kailangan mo. At pag sinabi mong verifiable, it can be verified sa third parties na information. No? Kasi hindi yung haka-haka lang, hindi yung allegations lang, hindi yung sinasabi lang, but it can be verified. No? Halimbawa, may ginamit siya na information, sabi mong verifiable. Saan yan bine-verify? Halimbawa, yung total sales niya ng isang company. Saan mo yan i-verify? Sa kanyang mga books of account, sa mga resibo na inisyu niya, or doon sa record po ng mga customers niya. Yun yung sinasabi natin na third party na verification. No? So, verifiable po yung information. Okay, so how do we select now the application ng transfer pricing methodologies natin? Kasi nga, diba sabi natin, magko-compare tayo. So, ano yung mga methods na gagamitin natin sa pagko-compare? At paano natin i-select? Paano natin piliin na ito talaga yung transfer pricing methods na kailangan natin or dapat gamitin natin dito sa ganitong klase ng sitwasyon. Oh? So the specific methods to be used in determining the arm's length price are discussed in Section 10 of these regulations. Ito pong RR 2-2013. And also the selection of a transfer pricing method is aimed at finding the most appropriate method for a particular case. Ano yung particular case? Depende na yun sa nature, functions, assets, risk ng company. Accordingly, the method that provides the most reliable measure of an arm's length result shall be used. Ano yun? The method daw that provides the most reliable measure of the arm's length result shall be used. Yun yung gagamitin. So for this purpose, the selection process should take into account the following. Ito yung gagamitin ng selection process. Okay? The respective strength and weakness of the transfer pricing methods. No? So actually po, dito sa Pilipinas, ang recommendation sa atin, apply all the methods and then recommend the best method. So yun po yung tinatawag dito sa atin na best method rule. No? So, determine the respective strength and weaknesses ng bawat transfer pricing methods. And what are these methods? Ito yung number 1, comparable uncontrolled price methods. Number 2, resale price method. Number 3, cost plus method. Number 4, transactional net margin methods. And number 5 po, yung profit split methods. Although doon sa RAMO or Revenue Audit Memorandum Order 1-2019, meron pa silang other methods, no? Yung cost method, yung sales method, yung gross profit methods. So, other methods na lang po yun na i-compare mo. Pero sabi po ng OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines, ito po yung recommended na methods, the 5 methods. No? So, the appropriateness of the method considered in view of the nature of the control transactions determined in particular through a functional analysis. And paano natin gagawin yung functional analysis? Titingnan natin the actual functions po ng company. Okay? And then the availability of reliable information. Siyempre, how can you compare kung walang information na available yung company? So, in particular, on uncontrolled comparables. So, dapat talaga, kompleto ka ng information. At sa experience ko sa paggawa po ng transfer pricing analysis, nasaan ang hirap doon sa pag-gather po talaga ng information. And in some countries, they are buying information from the commercial databases. And how much it cost? $100,000 of dollars just to obtain this information. Kaya business na rin po yan ng mga commercial databases na talagang nag-gather sila ng mga information, then gumagawa sila ng databases at pagkailangan na po ng transfer pricing analysis ay binibenta po nila. No? Binabayaran sila ng mga transfer pricing analysts, and even the government. Okay, so the degree of comparability between controlled and uncontrolled transactions, including the reliability of comparability adjustment that may be needed to eliminate material differences between them. So, pag na-compare ka na at nakita mo na may material differences na pwede mo namang i-adjust, then you make an adjustment. No? So, my question? The Bureau does not have a specific preference for any one method. Wala po siyang recommended na methods. Even the OECD, because I was attending ng OECD transfer pricing guidelines na seminars, no? I was delegate, no? Ilang beses yun, ng Philippines to the OECD transfer pricing seminars, no? At tinanong ko talaga sa kanila na why not make a matrix of the recommended na transfer pricing methods for every kind of company. No? Ang sabi nila, each transfer pricing case is unique, no? So we cannot afford to recommend the best transfer pricing methods because it has to be made considering the circumstances of the case, no? So ayaw nila magbigay na recommendation, no? So the transfer pricing method that produces the most reliable results, taking into account the quality of available data, no? So ano ba yung available data mo na nandyan? And the degree of accuracy of adjustments should be utilized, no? So yun ang gagamitin. In exceptional circumstances where there may not be comparable transaction or sufficient data to apply the above described methods, the Bureau may use the following approaches to verify whether the controlled transactions complied with the arm's length principle. Tinanong ko rin po ito sa OECD. So, kung paano talaga kung walang comparable? Sabi ng OECD, if there is no comparable, then meron pa ring transfer pricing analysis, no? Meron pa rin transfer pricing kahit na walang comparables. Anong gagawin mo? Hypothesize, no? Pero dito sa Revenue Memorandum to the 2013 na guidelines, ang sabi niya, anong gagawin mo pag wala talagang comparables? Extension of the transfer pricing methods, the comparable may be with enterprises in another industry segment or group of segments. So, pwede mong i-compare doon sa another industry segment na parang similar din doon sa tested party mo, no? So, use of a combination or mixture of the transfer pricing methods or other methods or approaches. So, depende na yan sa circumstances of the case. So, in all cases, taxpayers should be able to explain why specific transfer pricing method is selected or used in recording controlled transactions through proper documentation. Mind you, the most important part ng transfer pricing is documentation and proper documentation. Kasi without proper documentation, talo talaga yung taxpayer. Why? Kasi paano mo sasabihin na ito yung tama mo na transfer price kung wala kang mapapakitang dokumento, no? So, best transfer pricing method, pag gumagawa po tayo ng transfer pricing analysis, then you recommend the best transfer pricing method, no? So, part po yan doon sa conclusion at saka recommendation sa paggawa ng transfer pricing analysis report. Okay? Selection of the profit level indicator. Ano po itong profit level indicator? Ito yung mga gross profit, ito yung mga margins na kailangan natin at kasama ito sa i-compare po natin, no? So, in applying the transfer pricing method, due consideration must be given to the choice of the PLI or the profit level indicator. Ano ba yung profit level indicator? Pwedeng gross profit, pwedeng net profit, no? Which measures the relationship between profits and sales, cost incurred, or assets employed. So, the use of the appropriate PLI ensures better accuracy in the determination of the arm's length price of a controlled transaction. So, ang profit level indicator is presented in the form of a generally recognized or utilized financial ratio. Ano yung financial ratio? So, yung i-divide mo yung amount with the amount nung kung ano man yung variables na ginagamit mo. So the selection of the appropriate PLI depends on several factors. Ano yung mga factors na yan? Characterization of the business, ability of comparability data, the extent to which the PLI is likely to produce reliable measure or the arm's length profit. No? So depende sa effect niya doon sa analysis na ginagawa mo. These are the example of the profit level indicators. No? Return on cost. Paano mo i-compute yung return on cost? Cost plus margin and net cost plus margin. No? So, yan yung return on cost. No? So, paano naman kinocompute ang return on assets? Gross margin over the operating margin. No? Return on capital employed, return on operating assets. No? So, return on operating assets. Magkano, ano yun? Income over the operating assets. No? Kasi there are cases na asset intensive po ang isang company. So halimbawa, yung assets niya is 100 million. Yung sales niya is 100 million din at saka yung net margin niya is 5 million. So anong gagawin mo ngayon para makita mo yung sa operating assets mo? Yung return mo or yung net income mo na 5 million divided by the 100 million na operating assets mo. No? So yun lang yung return mo doon. So, napakaliit. Imagine, nag-invest ka ng 100 million sa assets tapos ito lang yung net income mo. So anong tingin ka agad dyan? Transfer pricing issue yan. Why? Kasi pag nag-invest ka ng operating assets mo na 100 million, ibig sabihin yan, dapat malaki yung kikitain mo. Kasi bakit ka ba nag-invest sa assets? In order to produce, to lower the cost of production. Kaya ka nag-invest sa assets para sa bumili ka ng machineries na magaling, maganda ang production. So, bakit nag-invest ka ng operating assets mo na mahal pero ang liit lang ng kita mo? So, in that case, mayroon siyang transfer pricing issues. Ano yun? Yung hindi arm's length yung profit na kinikita. Hindi sapat doon sa profit level indicator na papakita ng ratio mo over your assets employed with the return or yung kinita mo na income. No? So how you determine the arm's length results? Once the appropriate transfer pricing method has been identified, such is applied on the data of independent party transactions to arrive at the arm's length result. No? So, pagka meron ka ng mga methods and then apply mo dun sa data, dapat ang ma-arrive mo dyan is the arm's length result. Kaya ka nga nag-compare. No? So, in some cases, it will be possible to apply the arm's length principle to arrive at a single figure or specific ratio. That is the most reliable to establish whether the conditions of a transaction are arm's length. Basta ang sinasabi ko lang sa inyo, ang arm's length, may comparison ka ng independent party and related parties. Nandiyan ka agad yan. Kasi pag may nawala dyan, then hindi ka pwedeng mag-compare. It is generally difficult to arrive at a specific ratio or range of deviation that may be considered as arm's length. No? Kasi sa ibang bansa, meron na silang batas na specific sa transfer pricing. Meron na silang prescribed na ratio na deviation pero pasok pa rin. No? Ano yung sa OECD, 25% at saka 75%, pasok pa yan as arm's length. Yung sobrang baba na, below 25% na yung ratio, hindi na siya pasok, kailangan sobrang baba. So may issue na yan. At saka pag sobrang taas naman, more than 75% na yung range, susceptible na rin siya sa audit assessment or audit ng transfer pricing. No? So, more likely, the transfer pricing analysis would lead to a range of ratios. Yes, of course. The use of ranges to determine arm's length range shall be applied provided the comparables are reliable. Kailan hindi reliable yung comparables? Pagka kulang-kulang yung data or information. No? So, if the relevant condition of the control transactions, price or margin, is within the arm's length range, no adjustment shall be made. Siyempre, bakit no adjustment shall be made? Kasi ang Alas 5 na. No? Tapusin na lang natin itong topic na to. No? So, no adjustment should be made kung within the arm's length range ang ratio na ginagamit natin. But if the relevant condition of the controlled transaction falls outside the arm's length range asserted by the Bureau, ito yung may ginawa dito ang BAR dati na panahon ni Assistant Commissioner Valeroso. Kumuha po siya ng benchmark per industry. No? So, the taxpayer should present proof or substantiation that the condition of the controlled transaction satisfy the arm's length principle. Kasi yun ang benchmark eh. Yun ang pinaka-ratio na dapat hindi lalayo doon yung i-compare mo ng mga ratios. No? So, and the result falls within the arm's length range, that the arm's length range is different from the one asserted by the tax administration. Dapat ready din yun po yung taxpayer na magbibigay siya ng ibang klase ng ratio na malayo halimbawa doon sa benchmark ng BAR. So, dapat may justification siya kung bakit siya lumayo doon. No? Kaya, ang sabi natin, napaka-importante talaga documentation. No? If the taxpayer is unable to establish this fact, the Bureau must determine the point within the arm's length range to which it will adjust the condition of the controlled transaction. So, pagka malayo talaga, ang BAR mag-a-adjust siya. At ang sabi ko nga sa inyo, pag nag-adjust na yung BAR, this is the source now of the deficiency assessment. No? May nanonood pa? Ilan? Ilan? 6 po. Okay. Sige. Kasi 5 o'clock na yan. So, in determining this point, where the range comprises results of relatively equal and high reliability, it could be argued that any point in the range satisfies the arm's length principle. No? So, yung mga, sabi dito, any point in the range satisfy the arm's length principle. So, dapat at any point, no? Kasi kung hindi, magkakaroon ng adjustment. No? So, where comparability defects remain, halimbawa, nag-adjust ka na, pero defective pa rin, hindi pa talaga sila magkapareho, yung independent party at saka related party. It may be appropriate to use measures of central tendency, hindi na range, no? Measure of central tendency to determine this point. Ito yung mga weighted averages, ito yung median, no? Depending on the specific characteristic of the data or set. Kaya nga po sa paggawa po ng transfer pricing analysis, may kasama po tayong statistician to interpret the data. No? So in order to minimize the risk of error due to unknown or unquantifiable remaining comparability defects. Bakit ano po itong tawag na unquantifiable? Hindi ma-quantify. And that is the role of the statisticians to quantify the unquantifiable. No? Okay, so comparability adjustment. Magkakaroon ng comparability adjustment. So what are the differences between the transaction of the comparables and that of the tested party that must be identified and adjusted for in order for the comparables to be useful as basis for determining the arm's length price? No? Comparability adjustment include accounting adjustment and functions or risk adjustment. So, sabi na natin, dapat tayong mag-adjust to make the related party transactions similar with that of the independent transaction. So, yun po yung purpose po natin talaga, bakit tayo nagko-compare, no? So, para daw siya maging useful na magiging arm's length price, no? So, include accounting adjustment. Ito yung i-adjust natin, yung accounting adjustments. But as of now, sa experience ko, wala na masyadong differences in accounting because we adopted already the International Financial Reporting Standards. And for BAR purposes, the BAR accepts only the accrual basis of accounting. So, sa accounting, hindi na masyado na magkaroon tayo ng maraming adjustments. No? Halos pareho na. And functions or risk adjustment. No? Kasi depende yan sa functions na tinatackle nung entity and depende rin sa risk assumed also by the entity. No? Okay. So, comparability adjustments are intended to eliminate effects of differences that may exist between situation being compared and that which could materially affect the condition being examined in the methodology. So, ang comparability adjustment po, ang purpose dito is to make the transactions similar. Kaya ini-eliminate niya yung mga factors that makes the two transactions different, no? Kaya nga niya ini-eliminate yun. Kasi ang purpose natin dito, magko-compare tayo at ang effect na yan sa comparison, dapat pareho sila. No? So, i-eliminate natin by way of adjustment yung hindi sila magkapareho. No? So, this should not be performed to correct differences that have no material effect on the comparison as these adjustments are neither routine nor mandatory in a comparability analysis. So, hindi lang yan yung per se, i-correct mo lang yung differences na hindi naman materially affect ng comparison. No? Hindi ganon. So, when proposing comparability adjustment, resultant improvement or increase in the accuracy in the comparability should be demonstrated. So, dapat pag nagkaroon ka ng comparability adjustment, pakita mo talaga na kailangan siya at accurate siya doon sa kino-compare mo. Kasi may mga prohibitions din po sa paggawa ng comparability adjustment, especially if those adjustments are not needed at hindi naman nakaka-affect talaga sa comparability ng related party at saka independent party transactions. No? So these are the following adjustments that should be avoided. Number 1, adjustments that are questionable. No? Questionable. Bakit? Kasi malabo. When the basis for comparability criteria is only broadly satisfied. Malabo, pwede nang hindi mo na siya gagawin. No? So, excessive adjustment or adjustments that too greatly affect the comparable as that indicates that the third party being adjusted is actually not sufficiently comparable. No? Bakit excessive? Sobra-sobra yung adjustment, malayo. Halimbawa, yung isa sobrang laki ng assets, yung isa 1 million lang yung assets, yung isa 100 million. So, hindi sila pwede. O kahit mag-adjust ka pa, napakalayo pa rin ang adjustments na gagawin mo. In short, hindi sila comparable. No? Adjustments on differences that do not materially affect the comparability. Malayo, hindi kasama doon sa factor na i-adjust mo yung transfer pricing issue. Kaya nga dapat sa paggawa ng analysis, may issue ka talaga sa transfer pricing. No? Kasi mapapalayo yung adjustment mo pag hindi ka nag-analyze muna. And then number 4, highly subjective adjustments such as on the difference in product quality. Paano mo i-adjust yung difference ng product quality? They are not comparable, so you cannot make an adjustment on them. No? So, careful sa paggawa po ng comparability adjustment. No? Itong arm's length pricing methodologies na 5 na sabi ko sa inyo na comparable uncontrolled price method, resale price method, cost plus method, the transactional net margin method, at saka yung profit split method. I-discuss po natin to next week, no? So, mga Thursday ulit or Friday. So, ang gagawin po natin, magpo-post po kami sa Facebook natin at saka magpo-post tayo sa YouTube channel natin dito kung kailan po ulit. And dahil nga po sa need ngayon na may mga documentation requirements na po i-attach yung ating mga fiscal year ending na current. So, gusto ko po na ma-discuss na sa inyo ito thoroughly. That's why next week siguro, kung kakayanin ng schedule natin, 2 days po tayo mag-online streaming. No? Para ma-completely discuss natin sa inyo itong mga guidelines at saka yung mga RAMO or Audit Memorandum Guidelines para meron po tayong guidelines. Kasi ang transfer pricing po is highly technical. No? So with that, I would like to say thank you and thank you sa mga subscribers po natin and thank you din po sa mga nanonood sa atin sa Facebook po at saka sa YouTube. And we hope na nakapagdala po kami sa inyo ng mga updates natin, especially in transfer pricing. With that, I would like to say thank you and good day. Okay na? Dito.